corporation drives national productivity. Do you know that the economic development of a country is vital for the well-being of the people? Did you know that productivity growth can spur such economic expansion? The Malaysia Productivity Corporation, MPC, a statutory body under the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, has been mandated to ensure increased country productivity and competitiveness. The Malaysia Productivity Blueprint is the primary guide to the effort. MPC actively works with regulators and industry players to assist in formulating quality public policy. The National Policy on Good Regulatory Practice has been launched to produce excellent and effective policies and regulations. A business-friendly environment will boost the country's economy. Through the My Muda program, MPC strengthens the business ecosystem and reduces the unnecessary regulatory burdens. The transparency of regulatory compliance information is also made available through the My Garis Panduan portal. In addition, the Unified Public Consultation Platform ensures that all stakeholders have the opportunity to provide input on the rulemaking process. MPC leads the implementation of the Agile regulations. The E10 program in Kulim has successfully accelerated the construction of industrial, commercial, and residential buildings. The IUJKT program has accelerated land conversion in Kedah through digitalization. The success of E10 and IUJKT initiatives have encouraged foreign and domestic investors to start businesses and has created thousands of jobs for the people. 11 Productivity Nexus is the country's critical economic subsectors play a role in increasing productivity through industrial solutions. Various industry challenges have been successfully addressed in collaboration with the public and private sectors. Emphasis is also placed on the adoption of technology, research and development, and effective incentives. Talent is an essential factor in economic growth. Through the Academy in Factory program, the workforce is channeled into more productive sectors and increases employee productivity. The innovation of this program allows employees to learn and add skills while working. MPC also recognizes employees who contribute to increased productivity as productivity champions. MPC has developed a National Behavioural Insights program. MPC also develops the competencies of civil servants in applying behavioral insights in formulating policies. A framework for the implementation of the Behavioural Insights initiative was successfully produced. Since its inception, improving productivity at the firm level has always been a top plan of MPC. As a result, many successes in transforming firms to more competitive levels have been achieved. More significant efforts, the Productive Enterprises Program and the Productivity in Context, are being implemented to benefit all firms in Malaysia. MPC also actively collaborates with various organizations such as the World Bank, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the Asia Productivity Organization, and the Australian Government Productivity Commission internationally. The good practices of developed countries are implemented in Malaysia. MPC drives national productivity for economic growth and the well-being of the people.
MPC is highly committed to increase productivity of our fellow Malaysians and our beloved country, Malaysia.
Agile regulations enhance Malaysia productivity and competitiveness. The Malaysian population is growing steadily. They demand better quality of life and living standards. The economy must grow faster to support the requirements by creating quality jobs. Technology, mainly digital technology, changes rapidly. Many innovations in goods and services are being produced. They introduce new business models that create new consumer behaviours. The COVID-19 pandemic had accelerated the changes in how businesses operate. The government uses regulation as a policy tool to control firms and individuals' behaviour to achieve the desired outcome. Among the expected results are easier to do business and fairness in allowing competition and innovation. If regulatory delivery is inefficient and ineffective, it can create a market failure situation. If the market fails, investors will look for alternative investment locations to invest their money. This situation could apply to foreign or even domestic investors. Investors expect a quick return on their investments and a predictable and transparent regulatory environment. Regulations must be agile. Agile regulations mean the regulatory delivery must be responsive to the situation to realise the intended outcomes. Regulators should work hand in hand with the industry to understand the business value chains. The barriers to inefficient regulatory delivery need to be studied and quickly improve. Regulations should facilitate the realisation of businesses while safeguarding people. This is what we mean by agile regulations. Agile regulation has become the government's agenda. The Malaysian Prime Minister released a media statement about implementing agile regulations to promote reinvestment in the domestic economy. The Malaysia Digital Economy Blueprint, or better known as My Digital, identifies the need for an agile regulatory approach to meet the demand of digital economy business. We can make Malaysia's economy grow rapidly and give Malaysians a better quality of life and living standards. This message is brought to you by the Malaysia Productivity Corporation.
Nama saya Rosman. Saya berumur 52 tahun. Untuk menjadi seorang penghantar makanan ni memang kena hafal semua jalan. Bila kita tengok, jalan sana jam, kita jalan sini. Jalan sana jam, kita ikut jalan lain. Untuk kita lebih jadi produktif, kita kena rajin, bertanggungjawab dan peramah.
我是 Karen， 是一位家庭主妇，然后我的兴趣是做馒头。我定了9点到3点就是我的工作时间，就平时孩子跟老公出去之后，我就开始做我的馒头，就尽量利用空闲时间，看要做什么就做咯。
Nama saya Suresh. Saya bekerja sebagai juruteknik padang. Selalu rakan saya tanya, kenapa sampai awal sangat pejabat? Saya masuk awal tu senang untuk saya. Saya boleh buat perancang kerja saya dengan lebih aman. Bila saya membuat latihan, bukan saja saya yang memberi pengetahuan tu kepada yang orang yang mengambil latihan, tapi saya juga menerima input-input pada mereka.
Hujan, saya takkan tersangkut dalam hujan. Keluar baju hujan. Panas, ada jaket. Itu untuk kita lebih produktif. Masa 2-3 jam sekarang ni kalau duduk bawah jambatan rugi.
除了顾孩子跟做家务之外，也是可以有自己的事业，我也可以有自己的生产力，自己赚钱自己花。有时候因为一张在社交媒体的照片，我的订单就突然间多了。
Orang sekeliling kita sama produktif atau sama efisien dengan kita, kerja tu akan selesai dengan lebih senang. Sama-sama gembira dengan cara kerja tu.
最重要是我做的东西是我喜欢的，我孩子也喜欢吃，所以我更有动力去做。
Bila saya hantar customer suka, saya pun lagi suka. Saya gembira melihat senyuman mereka.
Saya produktif.
Saya produktif.
Saya produktif.
Bersama-sama kita majukan diri, barulah produktif.
Lonjakan produktiviti merupakan bidang keutamaan dalam hala tuju Rancangan Malaysia ke-12 ke arah negara yang makmur, inklusif dan mampan. Selari dengan rangka tindakan produktiviti Malaysia, Malaysia Productivity Blueprint MPB. Sasaran pertumbuhan produktiviti dengan kadar 3.6% setahun ditetapkan untuk tempoh Rancangan Malaysia ke-12. Rancangan Malaysia ke-12 mengenal pasti pembangunan bakat masa hadapan sebagai pemangkin dasar dalam mencapai sasaran pertumbuhan. Bakat berkemahiran tinggi diperlukan untuk memenuhi keperluan ekonomi yang pesat berkembang. Kementerian Perdagangan Antarabangsa dan Industri menerusi Perbadanan Produktiviti Malaysia MPC telah mewujudkan inisiatif Academy in Factory AIF yang merupakan satu program kerjasama inovatif antara pihak kerajaan, industri dan akademia bagi mendepani cabaran-cabaran yang dihadapi dalam usaha membangunkan bakat yang berkemahiran tinggi, produktif dan berdaya saing. Inisiatif AIF melatih tenaga kerja masa hadapan yang mampan berasaskan permintaan pasaran dan keperluan industri. Secara tidak langsung, AIF dapat mengurangkan kebergantungan terhadap tenaga kerja asing. Bakat AIF dapat menjana pendapatan lumayan dan memperoleh sijil kemahiran yang diiktiraf oleh kerajaan. AIF mempunyai lebih daripada 40 rakan strategik dalam membantu menjayakan inisiatif ini. Pelbagai info menarik dan terkini boleh diakses dengan mudah melalui portal AIF. Sila layari portal rasmi Academy in Factory AIF di aif.mpc.gov.my untuk maklumat lanjut.
Tahukah anda apakah itu My Gap? Dia bukan baju Shah Rukh Khan di dalam cerita Kus-Kus Tahir tu. Jadi kalau anda tengok di produk yang ada sijil ni, anda tahu makanan tersebut atau produk tersebut selamat dimakan dan juga segar lagi berkualiti. Dia lebih kurang mirip kepada sijil halal. Tapi sijil halal ni dia betul-betul spesifik kepada halal, macam mana proses penyembelihan apa semua. Tetapi My Gap adalah standard prosedur yang telah pun ditetapkan, yang mana dia ada satu sistem yang untuk memastikan kualiti produk anda berada di tahap premium. Jadi anda tak perlu risau. Contoh macam mana lembu, anda tak payah risau kok daging tu alah lembu gila, makan berbuih, mulut-mulut jatuh merumpok semua. Jangan risau. Sebab apa? Sijil ni akan pastikan lembu tu semua tak gila. Elok pergi sekolah dengar cakap, mereka ni akan pergi ajar. Mereka ni kat saja-saja akan ambil sijil. Mereka punya lah. Dia merupakan satu sijil untuk 3 golongan ni: penternak, peladang dan juga pengusaha aquaculture. Cara dia macam ni. Mereka akan tengok macam mana kita menyimpan rekod, macam mana kita punya sistem saliran, sistem air, macam mana kita handle ni cukup bersih ke. Apabila sampai di satu standard yang tertentu, maka anda layak untuk memperolehi sijil My Gap. Untuk anda apply adalah secara percuma. Belum lagi ada apa-apa lagi. Tapi di masa hadapan, kalau anda nak buat lambat-lambat lagi ni semua, yang tu tak ada nak jamin lah. Piawaian ni bukan di peringkat kata negeri, peringkat daerah, peringkat zon, bukan. Piawaian ni adalah di peringkat antarabangsa. Jadi produk ni bertaraf antarabangsa. Barulah kita boleh meningkatkan daya saing produk kita ni. Kita pi ke level antarabangsa, bukan fight di dalam negara-negara ni saja duk dengki tak habis semua dah. Kita bawa produk kita pi ke mata dunia. Baru orang lain pula boleh tengok, ush, produk yang mai daripada negara ni dia dah sampai satu level ataupun kualiti yang macam ni. Dengan cara tu juga akan memberikan semangat kepada pengusaha tadi, pengusaha produk tu. Sebab apa? Bila duk cukup ni macam-macamnya, satu macamnya stiker penuh di depan tu, kita pun confident lah sikit nak beli. Ada award tu, award ni, apa sijil tu, sijil ni, apa penuh di depan sijil saja. Sampai jenama, tak nampak jenama besar ni pun tak boleh juga. Dan sebagaimana yang kita sedia maklum, dengan adanya sijil ini, kita bakal meningkatkan produktiviti negara. Barulah kita seiring dengan negara-negara lain, baru kita boleh cucuk angin. Jadi, bagi anda peladang, penternak dan juga pengusaha aquaculture di luar sana, jangan ketinggalan. Ayo segera dapatkan sijil. Sebab apa? Baru boleh pergi challenge kawan. Baru tak, punya produk kualiti. Dia. Apa tu? My GAP ada tu kualiti tu. Dapatkan segera sijil My GAP. Rancak!
As a leader mesti berani buat keputusan. Salah tak apa buat keputusan. Biasalah buat keputusan salah kan. Cerita comfort zone ni dah lama dah. Kita cerita leader-leader bercerita pasal comfort zone. Leader sendiri bercerita pasal comfort zone. Tapi leader tak keluar daripada comfort zone. Macam mana nak buah nak keluar?
Siapa sangka setiakawan lebih 18 tahun berjaya menjadi batu asas
Agrotourism Centre hasil kerjasama Farm Fresh dan Universiti Putra Malaysia.
Kalau you compare last 10 years, kita bermula 2010 kan, sampai sekarang dah 10 tahun. 60 ekor lembu tak ada apalah cerita nak pengurusan 60 ekor lembu, 2-3 orang pun boleh jaga kan. Kita buat semua manually, buat sendiri. Jadi untuk mencapai economy of scale yang itu, kita kena expand. Economy of scale tu untuk you tambah orang pengurusan, untuk tambah ini, dia tak beri pulangan yang sewajarnya kerana economy of scale tu tak cukup. Our mission ialah untuk produce fresh milk yang sedap and then deliver within 48 jam secara konsisten, dan itu adalah KPI kita untuk ladang yang ini. Untuk menguruskan itu, kalau kata tak ada satu sistem yang efisien, delivery system kita tak sampai. Bila barang premium, harga dia mestilah premium juga. Tapi kita dekat Farm Fresh, kita nak bagi harga yang affordable. Digital teknologi yang ada dalam ni ialah daripada segi pengumpulan data. Jadi kita kena ada data-data yang spesifik untuk kita tahu prestasi ladang dan pengeluaran lembu kita. Bila kita dah tahu data-data ni, kita dapat troubleshoot. Data tu penting untuk kita. Kalau kata kita tak ada di digital punya maklumat, kita tak tahu nak buat apa. Kita just assume. So, sebagai leader, kita dapat full control dengan kita boleh akses kepada data-data yang tadi supaya memudahkan kita untuk buat keputusan. Sebelum ni saya guna rapid exit. Jadi itu limitasi dia, satu hari saya boleh perah 800 hingga 900 ekor. Dengan mesin yang baru ni saya boleh perah sekarang 1200 hingga 1500 ekor. Jadi pengeluaran lebih tinggi. Dengan tracking sistem boleh meningkatkan kita punya integriti dalam supply chain untuk kita deliver produk yang terbaik kepada consumer kita. Kalau you tak betul-betul jaga susu itu kan, belum sampai kita nak manufacture dekat kilang pun dia dah rosak. So tracking sistem ni sangat penting dan consumer kita rasa selamat untuk menggunakan produk kita, dan dia akan loyal dengan produk kita kerana dia rasa this is produk yang boleh kami percayai. Online platform adalah salah satu kaedah di syarikat kami macam mana kita mengumpulkan data untuk kita tengok customer behavior. Kita nak tengok pola pembelian, SKU mana yang laku. Jadi data-data macam ini kita tahu kita nak buat promotion of sales kita dan planning kita punya production pula. Dan tak ada banyak wastage dan kita boleh save dekat situ. Leader kena berani untuk invest. Banyak faedah yang kita boleh dapat daripada invest dekat digital ni. Bila dah skala yang besar ni, memang kita sangat memerlukan digital teknologi. Kita tak boleh lagi manual. If you want to grow big, kita kena berani ambil keputusan untuk invest dan how to penetrate the market, how to break the market. Tapi kalau kata kita masih tak nak terbuka dengan teknologi baru, saya ingat kita akan tertinggal. Untuk deliver produk yang bagus, kita mesti ada analisa supaya kita boleh deliver produk kita dengan selamat kepada consumer. Dan bila orang dah confident dengan produk kita, loyalty tu akan datang sendiri. Dengan digital teknologi ini dapat membantu kita menjadi pengeluar susu terbesar negara dengan sekarang market share sudah 55%. That's what make people happy, stakeholder happy, pekerja happy, everybody happy, kau pun happy.
Nothing beats spending time with your loved ones. Every single moment precious as the day they were born. And every day, their lives are at risk. Did you know that within 20 minutes from the last cigarette is smoked, the heart rate returns to normal? And within half a day, our body cleanses itself of excess carbon monoxide from cigarettes. After 2 days, you may notice a heightened sense of smell and taste. And after 1 month, your lung function begins to improve, and these are just the short-term effects. As a second-hand smoke victim, you may carry smoke particles. the residue of smoke will affect the surrounding people. When cigarette smoke particles interact with air gases, it absorbs into surrounding surfaces such as carpets, clothing, and even toys. 38.4% of adults reported that they were exposed to secondhand smoking at home, whereby an estimated of 27.9% were non-smokers. Non-smokers who live with people who smoke are likely to catch tobacco-related illness and other health risks, such as heart disease and stroke. Be one of the successful people who quit smoking. You can make a difference.
Are you aware that behavioral insights have been actively used in designing and implementing public policies in many countries throughout the world? Are you aware that behavioral insights could be a policy tool in addition to regulations and incentives? Do you know that Malaysia Productivity Corporation, or MPC in short, has been entrusted with developing and coordinating behavioral insights initiatives in Malaysia? Well, let me tell you about the process of how a behavioral insight project or case study is being carried out for the public sector. I hope that you might want to consider your organization to participate in behavioral insights projects to improve the effectiveness of your policies. Effective policies ensure a high probability of success for governments that intend to achieve their desired outcomes. There are 8 steps for you to take part in with the community and public sector to make use of behavioral insights in policymaking. The first step is for you to express interest with MPC that you want to know about using behavioral insights application in public policymaking. How? It is simple. Just contact or send an email to the Director General of MPC. Step 2. You will be contacted and an initial discussion will be set up via an online meeting platform to discuss your interest further. Step 3. Your team will be invited for an onboarding program to familiarize them about behavioral insights through structured online training and online workshops. At the end of the journey, potential projects are identified to be considered for using the behavioral insights approach. Step 4. A team will be formed comprising your organization team, MPC team, and academia team. The multi-teams or collaborations have proven to be a successful model for behavioral insights projects. Step 5. The project starts. The project starts with an understanding of the problem statement, and the team will validate it. Data collection to understand the as-is behavior will be carried out. Finally, the behavioral gaps are identified. Step 6 is to establish the objectives of the project. Solutions are explored and designed usage of nudges typically are preferred. By using nudges, the target people are directed towards the selected option without removing the right for them to choose from various options. Step 7. Experiments are conducted for a while with a sample population. Most of the project makes use of the random control trial, where groups of people are set up and given different nudges. At the time of the experiments, data is collected and the results are produced. Finally, Step 8, conclusions of the study and which nudges are the best is derived. Based on your findings, your organization's management may decide on potentially expanding the project to a bigger size of the population. Well, usage of behavioral insights has been proven in many countries around the world to be as effective as a policy tool. My recommendation is that your organization should seriously consider using behavioral insights in your policy design and implementation. One thing is for sure, the behavioral insights approach is very cost-effective as compared to regulatory or incentive-based methods. Well, join us at NPC to experiment using behavioral insights in public policymaking. We are entrusted to facilitate public service organizations to establish a competent behavioral insights team in your organization to continuously make use of behavioral insights in decision-making. Well, see you in our next Behavior Insights video. Let me end by quoting, "Managing behaviors is the key to achieving the desired outcomes."
Hello, Assalamualaikum. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Yang berhormat Tengku Datuk Seri Utama Zafrul Tengku Abdul Aziz, the Minister of International Trade and Industry Malaysia, berbahagia Datuk Abdul Latif Abu Usman, Director General Malaysia Productivity Corporation, MPC, Datuk-datuk, tuan-tuan, puan-puan, members of the media, fellow participants, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the National Conference on Behavioural Insights organized by Malaysia Productivity Corporation, also known to us as MPC. And the theme for this year is nudging, an approach for applying behavioral insights for better policy and regulation. My name is Syed Munawar and I'll be your host and also the moderator for Stream 2 in this conference. I suppose for the sake of convenience throughout the conference, we will be using these two words, behavioral insights or also BI, interchangeably. And BI was first introduced more than 10 years ago. In Malaysia itself, it's relatively new. Notwithstanding that fact, BI has already made its progress and inroads into many public agencies thanks to the continuous effort by MPC in promoting BI in various agencies across the nation and organizing annual conferences such as this. BI, for those who are new, is an interdisciplinary field that draws on psychology, economics, and also sociology, and also other disciplines to better understand human behavior and also to understand decision making. And it involves using scientific evidence to design policies, programs, and interventions that will nudge people towards making better choices for themselves and also for the society at large. It is hoped that this conference will be able to foster a better, deeper understanding of human behavior and decision making while exploring the potential of BI in improving policies and programs, and also to share best practices and case studies from around the world by encouraging collaboration and also knowledge sharing among experts and practitioners. And ultimately, of course, to inspire new ideas and approaches to solving complex social challenges. And this conference brings together experts from various fields to share their insights and experiences. And we are honored to have all of you here with us today. Before we move on any further, I would like to now invite Mr. Aizat Akil Misro to lead the Dua recitation. Mr. Aizat, if you please.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, most merciful, all praise is due to Almighty Allah, the cherisher and sustainer of the world. May the peace and mercy of Allah be upon His Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his families, companions and followers. Allahumma ya Hanan ya Manan. In conjunction with the National Conference on Behavioural Insights 2023, organized by Malaysia Productivity Corporation with the theme Nudging an Approach in Applying Behavioural Insights for Better Public Policy and Regulations, we seek your blessing for a flawless progress of this event from the beginning till the end. We pray for your guidance and may this conference be a successful one. Allahumma ya Latif ya Rahman, give us the strength to be istiqamah in our commitment to drive the application of behavior insights or BI in a public policy making. We hope Malaysia and all of us here can embrace BI applications for quality regulations and effective policies where a nudge is used as a mild reminder to encourage people to make better decisions without restricting their freedom of choice. Rabbana atina fid dunya hasanah wa fil akhirati hasanah wa qina azaban nar. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi washabihi wasallam walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Amin, amin.
Amin, Allahumma amin. Thank you very much, Mr. Aizat Akil Misro. Before we get started with the exciting presentations and discussion, we have to acknowledge first and foremost MPC's role as a driving force behind this conference. MPC has worked tirelessly to bring together this group of experts and making BI conference an annual event. And this annual BI conference has now become an institution in itself for us to share our knowledge and also ideas. And MPC's dedication and hard work have been instrumental in making this event a reality. Therefore, to set the stage, I would like to now invite Datuk Abdul Latif Abu Usman, the Director General of MPC, to deliver a welcoming speech. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Datuk Abdul Latif Abu Usman.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Yang berhormat Senator Tengku Datuk Seri Utama Zafrul Tengku Abdul Aziz, Minister of International Trade Industry, MITI, Tan Sri, Datuk Seri, Datuk, eminent speakers, members of media, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, salam sejahtera and salam Malaysia Madani. Malaysia Productivity Corporation MPC welcomes all guests to the National Conference on Behavioural Insights 2023. Thank you Muhammad Senator Tengku Datuk Seri Utama Zafrul Tengku Abdul Aziz, the meeting minister, for taking the time to be with us at this annual conference on Behavioural Insights, BI. We are honoured to have a panel of distinguished speakers who will share valuable insights on applying nudging and BI in public policies and regulations. This year's BI conference marks the 4th edition, and the theme for this year is nudging, an approach in applying behavioural insights for better public policy and regulation. The conference brings together a diverse range of experts, including 5 international and 5 local BI experts, to share their knowledge and experiences on the theme. They will discuss how nudging and BI approaches can be utilized to design and evaluate policy, improve existing policies and regulations, and change public behaviour. Quality policies and regulations are critical to robust productivity growth. Malaysia's productivity recovered to the pre-pandemic performance in 2022 at 5.4% growth, registering a value level of 95,628 ringgit Malaysia per employee. It was a sharp rebound from 2021, where Malaysia's productivity was at 1.8% growth, with 90,697 ringgit Malaysia per employee. Malaysia aims to achieve a productivity growth of more than 3.6% throughout the 12th Malaysia Plans period, towards realising the productivity level of 106,060 ringgit Malaysia by the year 2025. In achieving this target, Malaysia's business ecosystem must be conducive to economic growth, and its policies and regulations must be of quality to build the right environment. The application of BI in policy making is gaining positive momentum towards building a quality regulatory ecosystem. In the 12th Malaysia Plan, the government has entrusted MPC to drive the implementation of BI in public policy, and we are committed to delivering the mandate. Since 2020, MPC has been active in cementing the foundation for BI. 22 case studies were completed. Among the topics were nudging taxpayers to pay assessment tax without delay, encouraging youth to be innovative, and accelerating digital adoption among entrepreneurs. In building the capacity of the government offices and creating a pool of local BI experts, MPC has trained 609 individuals involving 42 ministries and government agencies. We have also engaged with the private sector to expand the pool. MPC has developed the National Behavioural Insights guidelines as a reference for regulators, policymakers, and practitioners to apply BI as a policy and productivity tool. Ladies and gentlemen, nudging as a tool in applying BI is a relatively new concept for us in promoting and encouraging a more preferred behaviour without limiting choices. Nudging could be a useful, non-invasive and cost-effective alternative to encouraging compliance. Today's conference will shed more light on nudging as a method to apply behavioural insights for better policy and regulation. On that note, I welcome all of you to this conference, and I hope that today's sessions will be fruitful and productive for everyone. Stay productive, stay safe, and continue to deliver for the good of the country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dato'. That was Dato' Abdul Latif Abusman, the Director General of Malaysia Productivity Corporation, who set the stage for what promises to be another engaging and informative conference, insyaAllah. As we embark on this conference, we are actually very fortunate to have Yang Berhormat Tengku Datuk Seri Utama Zafrul Tengku Abdul Aziz, the Minister of International Trade and Industry of Malaysia, joining us today, who will be providing us with his valuable insights on the importance of behavioural insights in policy making. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Yang Berhormat Tengku Datuk Seri Utama Zafrul Tengku Abdul Aziz to deliver the opening speech for our conference.
Yang berbahagia Datuk Abdul Latif bin Haji Abu Seman, Director General of Malaysia Productivity Corporation, MPC, Datuk-datuk, eminent speakers, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, good afternoon dan salam sejahtera. At the outset, I must congratulate Malaysia Productivity Corporation, MPC, for organising the National Conference on Behavioural Insights 2023. So this reflects MPC's commitment to drive the application of behavioural insights, or BI, in public policy making, a role entrusted to MPC under the 12th Malaysia Plan, where BI is listed as a complementary tool to enhance the government services and guide citizens towards making better decisions. I'm confident that MPC, through this conference, will promote a better understanding of BI, especially in embedding nudging in an entity's operations and communications as a more effective way of developing, implementing, and embracing new policies and regulations. Ladies and gentlemen, the Ministry of International Trade and Industry is mandated to bring in investments, expand international trade, and facilitate industrial development. To achieve this, we need solid policies and regulations to sustainably develop the country's supply chain and appropriately train our human capital towards higher productivity, global competitiveness, and shared prosperity. So to this end, Malaysia welcomes BI applications for effective policies and quality regulations where a nudge is utilized as a gentle push or reminder to help people make better, more appropriate decisions without limiting their freedom of choice. So last year, with assistance from MPC, MITI itself conducted a BI project to enhance compliance with the Strategic Trade Act 2010. The incorporation of nudges, such as using plain language, reorganizing the information sequence, and emphasizing pertinent details effectively, this has reduced the number of errors in the application process and improved regulatory compliance. In another case study, also conducted by MPC, nudging was used to increase parking compound payments in areas under the Sungai Petani Municipal Council in Kedah. The nudging message printed on the compound notice led to a 30% increase in public compliance with payments made within the 14-day payment period. Hence, I foresee vast potential for nudging and BI in increasing the ease of doing business in Malaysia, particularly in reducing compliance costs and deploying the optimal level of resources on regulatory or procedural monitoring and enforcement. These are key to managing operational costs and maximizing profitability. As such, nudging and BI can be a reformative steps for quality rulemaking and efficient regulatory implementation without relying on heavy-handed or coercive measures. I foresee its application by agencies such as the Malaysia Special Task Force to Facilitate Business, better known as Pemudah, and other regulatory or enforcement entities with a similar mandate to reduce bureaucracy for investors and businesses to achieve the country's long-term goals. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank the speakers today who have agreed to share their expertise on the various aspects of behavioural insights. Malaysia's journey in BI is still in its infancy, and we look forward to learning from experts like yourselves on international best practices for BI applications. So on that note, I hereby officially open the National Conference on Behavioural Insights 2023 theme Nudging, an approach in applying behavioural insights for better policy and regulation. Thank you, and I wish you a productive session ahead.
Thank you very much, Yang Berhormat Datuk Seri, for sharing your thoughts and declaring the conference open. We are grateful for your contribution to this conference, and we appreciate the time and effort that you have taken for this conference. And once again, Yang Berhormat Datuk Seri, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we now come to the most anticipated part of the conference, which is the keynote address, which is scheduled to begin at 3 p.m. But before we begin our keynote address, I would like to take this opportunity to also remind all participants to register online, so that you'll be entitled for digital certificate, and it also helps the organizer to profile participants and improve the impact of the subsequent conference in time to come. So, and in fact, by having your profile, it will also help us in understanding you better, and it's also a part and parcel of Behavioural Insight itself. So our keynote address will begin at 3. For now, we are going to take a breather and see you in 15 minutes from now.
Agile regulations enhance Malaysia productivity and competitiveness. The Malaysian population is growing steadily. They demand better quality of life and living standards. The economy must grow faster to support the requirements by creating quality jobs. Technology, mainly digital technology, changes rapidly. Many innovations in goods and services are being produced. They introduce new business models that create new consumer behaviours. The COVID-19 pandemic had accelerated the changes in how businesses operate. The government uses regulation as a policy tool to control firms' and individuals' behaviour to achieve the desired outcome. Among the expected results are easier to do business and fairness in allowing competition and innovation. If regulatory delivery is inefficient and ineffective, it can create a market failure situation. If the market fails, investors will look for alternative investment locations to invest their money. This situation could apply to foreign or even domestic investors. Investors expect a quick return on their investments and a predictable and transparent regulatory environment. Regulations must be agile. Agile regulations mean the regulatory delivery must be responsive to the situation to realise the intended outcomes. Regulators should work hand in hand with the industry to understand the business value chains. The barriers to inefficient regulatory delivery need to be studied and quickly improve. Regulations should facilitate the realisation of businesses while safeguarding people. This is what we mean by agile regulations. Agile regulation has become the government's agenda. The Malaysian Prime Minister released a media statement about implementing agile regulations to promote reinvestment in the domestic economy. The Malaysia Digital Economy Blueprint, or better known as My Digital, identifies the need for an agile regulatory approach to meet the demand of digital economy business. We can make Malaysia's economy grow rapidly and give Malaysians a better quality of life and living standards. This message is brought to you by the Malaysia Productivity Corporation.
Nama saya Rosman. Saya berumur 52 tahun. Untuk menjadi seorang pengantar makanan ni memang kena hafal semua jalan. Bila kita tengok, jalan sana jam, kita jalan sini. Jalan sana jam, kita ikut jalan lain. Untuk kita lebih jadi produktif, kita kena rajin, bertanggungjawab dan peramah.
我是 Karen， 是一位家庭主妇，然后我的兴趣是做馒头。我定了9点到3点，就是我的工作时间。就平时孩子跟老公出去之后，我就开始做我的馒头，就尽量利用空闲时间，看要做什么就做咯。
Nama saya Suresh. Saya bekerja sebagai juruteknik padang. Selalu rakan saya tanya, kenapa sampai awal sangat pejabat? Saya masuk awal tu senang untuk saya. Saya boleh buat perancang kerja saya dengan lebih aman. Bila saya membuat latihan, bukan saja saya yang memberi pengetahuan tu kepada orang yang mengambil latihan, tapi saya juga menerima input-input pada mereka.
Hujan? Saya takkan tersangkut dalam hujan. Keluar baju hujan. Panas, ada jaket. Itu untuk kita lebih produktif. Masa 2-3 jam sekarang ni kalau duduk bawah jambatan rugi.
除了顾孩子跟做家务之外，也是可以有自己的事业，我也可以有自己的生产力，自己赚钱自己花。有时候因为一张在社交媒体的照片，我的订单就突然间多了。
Orang sekeliling kita sama produktif atau sama efisien dengan kita, kerja tu akan selesai dengan lebih senang. Sama-sama gembira dengan cara kerja tu.
最重要是我做的东西是我喜欢的，我孩子也喜欢吃，所以我更有动力去做。
Bila saya hantar customer suka, saya pun lagi suka. Saya gembira melihat senyuman mereka.
Saya produktif.
Saya produktif.
Saya produktif.
Bersama-sama kita majukan diri, barulah produktif.
Lonjakan produktiviti merupakan bidang keutamaan dalam hala tuju Rancangan Malaysia ke-12 ke arah negara yang makmur, inklusif dan mampan. Selari dengan rangka tindakan Produktiviti Malaysia, Malaysia Productivity Blueprint MPB. Sasaran pertumbuhan produktiviti dengan kadar 3.6% setahun ditetapkan untuk tempoh Rancangan Malaysia ke-12. Rancangan Malaysia ke-12 mengenal pasti pembangunan bakat masa hadapan sebagai pemangkin dasar dalam mencapai sasaran pertumbuhan. Bakat berkemahiran tinggi diperlukan untuk memenuhi keperluan ekonomi yang pesat berkembang. Kementerian Perdagangan Antarabangsa dan Industri menerusi Perbadanan Produktiviti Malaysia MPC telah mewujudkan inisiatif Academy in Factory AIF yang merupakan satu program kerjasama inovatif antara pihak kerajaan, industri dan akademia bagi mendepani cabaran-cabaran yang dihadapi dalam usaha membangunkan bakat yang berkemahiran tinggi, produktif dan berdaya saing. Inisiatif AIF melatih tenaga kerja masa hadapan yang mampan berasaskan permintaan pasaran dan keperluan industri. Secara tidak langsung, AIF dapat mengurangkan kebergantungan terhadap tenaga kerja asing. Bakat AIF dapat menjana pendapatan lumayan dan memperoleh sijil kemahiran yang diiktiraf oleh kerajaan. AIF mempunyai lebih daripada 40 rakan strategik dalam membantu menjayakan inisiatif ini. Pelbagai info menarik dan terkini boleh diakses dengan mudah melalui portal AIF. Sila layari portal rasmi Academy in Factory AIF di aif.mpc.gov.my untuk maklumat lanjut.
Tahukah anda apakah itu My Gap? Dia bukan baju Shah Rukh Khan di dalam cerita Kus-Kus Fatahir tu. Jadi kalau anda tengok di produk yang ada sijil ni, anda tahu makanan tersebut atau produk tersebut selamat dimakan dan juga segar lagi berkualiti. Dia lebih kurang mirip kepada sijil halal. Tapi sijil halal ni dia betul-betul spesifik kepada halal, macam mana proses penyembelihan apa semua. Tetapi My Gap adalah standard prosedur yang telah pun ditetapkan, yang mana dia ada satu sistem yang untuk memastikan kualiti produk anda berada di tahap premium. Jadi anda tak perlu risau. Contoh macam mana lembu, anda tak payah risau kok daging tu adalah lembu gila, makan berbuih, mulut-mulut jatuh mengumpuk semua. Jangan risau. Sebab apa? Sijil ni akan pastikan lembu tu semua tak gila. Elok pergi sekolah dengar cakap, mereka ni akan pergi ajar. Mereka ni ingat saja kami sijil. Mereka punya lah. Dia merupakan satu sijil untuk 3 golongan ni. Penternak, peladang dan juga pengusaha aquaculture. Cara dia macam ni. Mereka akan tengok macam mana kita menyimpan rekod, macam mana kita punya sistem saliran, sistem air, macam mana kita handle ni cukup bersih ke. Apabila sampai di satu standard yang tertentu, maka anda layak untuk memperolehi sijil My Gap. Untuk anda apply adalah secara percuma. Belum lagi ada apa-apa lagi. Tapi di masa hadapan kalau anda dah buat lambat-lambat lagi ni semua, yang tu tak ada nak jamin lah. Piawaian ni bukan di peringkat kata negeri, peringkat daerah, peringkat zon, bukan. Piawaian ni adalah di peringkat antarabangsa. Jadi produk ni bertaraf antarabangsa. Barulah kita boleh meningkatkan daya saing produk kita ni. Kita pi ke level antarabangsa, bukan fight di dalam negara-negara ni saja duk dengki tak habis semua dah. Kita bawa produk kita pi ke mata dunia. Baru orang lain pula boleh tengok, ush, produk yang mai daripada negara ni dia dah sampai satu level ataupun kualiti yang macam ni. Dengan cara tu juga akan memberikan semangat kepada pengusaha tadi, pengusaha produk tu. Sebab apa? Bila duk cukup ni macam-macamnya, satu macamnya stiker penuh di depan tu, kita pun confident lah sikit nak beli. Ada award tu, award ni apa, sijil tu, sijil ni apa, penuh di depan sijil saja. Sampai jenama, tak nampak jenama besar ni, pun tak boleh juga. Dan sebagaimana yang kita sedia maklum, dengan adanya sijil ini, kita bakal meningkatkan produktiviti negara. Barulah kita seiring dengan negara-negara lain, baru kita boleh cucuk angin. Jadi, bagi anda peladang, penternak dan juga pengusaha aquakultur di luar sana, jangan ketinggalan. Ayo segera dapatkan sijil. Sebab apa? Baru boleh pergi challenge kawan. Baru tak, punya produk kualiti. Dia. Apa tu? MyGAP ada tu kualiti tu. Dapatkan segera sijil MyGAP. Rancak!
As a leader mesti berani buat keputusan. Salah tak apa buat keputusan. Biasalah buat keputusan salah kan. Cerita comfort zone ni dah lama dah. Dah lama dah kita cerita leader-leader bercerita pasal comfort zone. Leader sendiri bercerita pasal comfort zone. Tapi leader tak keluar daripada comfort zone. Macam mana nak buah nak keluar?
Siapa sangka setiakawan lebih 18 tahun berjaya menjadi batu asas
Agrotourism Centre hasil kerjasama Farm Fresh dan Universiti Putra Malaysia.
Kalau you compare last 10 years, kita bermula 2010 kan sampai sekarang dah 10 tahun. 60 ekor lembu tak ada apalah cerita nak pengurusan 60 ekor lembu, 2-3 orang pun boleh jaga kan. Kita buat semua manually, buat sendiri. Jadi untuk mencapai economy of scale yang itu, kita kena expand. Economy of scale tu untuk you tambah orang pengurusan, untuk tambah ini, dia tak beri pulangan yang sewajarnya kerana economy of scale tu tak cukup. Our mission ialah untuk produce fresh milk yang sedap and then deliver within 48 jam secara konsisten, dan itu adalah KPI kita untuk ladang yang ini. Untuk menguruskan itu, kalau kata tak ada satu sistem yang efisien, delivery system kita tak sampai. Bila barang premium, harga dia mestilah premium juga. Tapi kita dekat Farm Fresh, kita nak bagi harga yang affordable. Digital teknologi yang ada dalam ni ialah daripada segi pengumpulan data. Jadi kita kena ada data-data yang spesifik untuk kita tahu prestasi ladang dan pengeluaran lembu kita. Bila kita dah tahu data-data ni, kita dapat troubleshoot. Data tu penting untuk kita. Kalau kata kita tak ada digital punya maklumat, kita tak tahu nak buat apa. Kita just assume. So, sebagai leader, kita dapat full control dengan kita boleh akses kepada data-data yang tadi supaya memudahkan kita untuk buat keputusan. Sebelumnya saya guna rapid exit. Jadi itu limitasi dia, satu hari saya boleh perah 800 hingga 900 ekor. Dengan mesin yang baru ni saya boleh perah sekarang 1200 hingga 1500 ekor. Jadi pengeluaran lebih tinggi. Dengan tracking system boleh meningkatkan kita punya integriti dalam supply chain untuk kita deliver produk yang terbaik kepada consumer kita. Kalau you tak betul-betul jaga susu itu kan, belum sampai kita nak manufacture dekat kilang pun dia dah rosak. So tracking system ni sangat penting dan consumer kita rasa selamat untuk menggunakan produk kita, dan dia akan loyal dengan produk kita kerana dia rasa this is produk yang boleh kami percayai. Online platform adalah salah satu kaedah di syarikat kami macam mana kita mengumpulkan data untuk kita tengok customer behavior. Kita nak tengok pola pembelian, SKU mana yang laku. Jadi data-data macam ini kita tahu kita nak buat promotion of sales kita dan planning kita punya production pula. Dan tak ada banyak.
Welcome back to the National Conference on Behavioural Insights 2023, brought to you by Malaysia Productivity Corporation, MPC. Earlier on, during the welcoming speech, yang berbahagia Dato' Abdul Latif Abusman, the Director General of MPC, was sharing some of the success stories regarding behavioural insights and nudging as a policy tool to promote better decision making among the public. and the ensuing message during the opening speech by Yang Berhormat Tengku Datuk Seri Utama Zafrul Tengku Abdul Aziz, the Minister of Ministry of International Trade and Industry, ensuring government's commitment in making behavioural insights and also nudging as a policy tools in introducing interventions for higher productivity across all ministries. Now we move on to our keynote address, and our keynote speaker today is a renowned expert in field of nudging, and we are honoured to have him share his insight with us. The keynote address will be followed by discussion, so allow me to introduce both our keynote speaker and also the discussant. But first and foremost, let us all welcome our speaker, Mr. Pelle Galbert Hansen, and also our discussant, Mr. Faisal Naru. Hello, Pelle. I can't hear you, Pelle. Maybe you're muted. Can we try your microphone?
Yes.
Yeah,
Can
okay.
you hear me now? Yes.
Good. How are you, Faisal?
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm good, thank you.
Thank you very much for both of you. A little bit of background for both our speaker and also our discussant. Mr. Pelle Galbert Hansen is Chief Executive iNudgeU and Behavioural Scientist at the Roskilde University, Denmark. Pelle has many years of experience in working with applied behavioural science within a wide range of areas. He is the director of ISSP, that is the Initiative of Science, Society and Policy, chairman of the Danish Nudging Network, and the co-founder of TEN, TEN, that stands for the European Nudge Network. And the keynote address session will be followed by discussion with Mr. Faisal Naru, who is the co-founder and director of Think, Test and Do. Mr. Faisal Naru is an executive leader, strategist, implementer, thinker, and also experienced professional with more than 20 years experience of organizational management, politics, and public policy, as well as development. He was the inaugural executive director of the Policy Innovation Center, PIC, at the Nigerian Economic Summit Group with Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors, where he set up Africa's first national behavioral unit. Prior to setting up the PIC, Mr. Faisal Naru founded the work at OECD on behavioral insights, including the landmark publication entitled Behavioral Insights in Public Policy, and also other OECD publications, guidelines, and also behavioral map. So impressive background, both our speakers and also our discussant. Now we begin our keynote address. I hand over the session to you, Mr. Pelle. Please join me in welcoming Pelle Galbert Hansen. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. I just need to find out the techniques here. Can you see my slides? Yes, there they are. There's a bit with formatting always, so I hope that it will just kind of flow nicely. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you very much for devoting your time to listening to what I have to say. This, of course, means that I've given considerate thought about what is most important to say in this area. Now, I could do one of the regular talks where I promote behavioral insights and nudging, talking about all the good and interesting and fascinating examples. But I think that all of you are listening to this conference because you've already heard a lot about the good and nice examples. So instead of doing this sort of promoting talk, I'm going to give you a roadmap of what behavioral insights is and what nudging is and how to look at it in a broader context. And the reason I'm doing that should be clear during the talk, where I will talk about behavioral insights being in the beginnings of a crisis that we need to avoid. So that said, let's go into it. I'm going to talk about nudging as an approach for applying behavioral insights for better public policy and regulation. And in particular, I'm going to talk about what nudging is and what behavioral insights is and how practitioners are to understand this movement. And basically, we're going to go through 4 chapters, 10 minutes each at max, hopefully a little less. So the first chapter is an illustration of a nudge intervention, so that all of us kind of are on the same line. It's not the most exciting, it's not the most socially impactful intervention made within the paradigm, but it's just made by me, so I like it quite a lot, and it's about food. Now, in Denmark and in many other countries, especially Western countries, we have a problem of people eating way too much, and in particular eating way too much meat. Now, this is bad both for health, but of course it's also bad for climate. So a lot of governments have this goal, this target of reducing meat intake amongst their citizens. However, if there's something that citizens don't like, is somebody messing with their meat or just with their food. So it's a very, very kind of close call or close infringement on people's privacy when a government starts to talk about what people ought to eat. Now, some years ago, we addressed this issue at a conference in what is called the Danish regions, that is the Danish healthcare system. And as part of this conference, we formulated the registration formula. So this was a physical conference where people had to show up 14 days after they had signed up for the conference. Now, unbeknownst to the participants of the conference, we had randomized people into two different groups. Now, in one group, they got the standard way of kind of describing lunch. That is what you can see above. There, people were told that at the conference, a non-vegetarian buffet will be served for lunch. And then they should state whether they would like to have a vegetarian dish prepared for them if they wanted to. It was an open field answer, so they had to provide one or the other. They couldn't just click through. And that was a little obstacle made deliberately in order to ensure that people were actually answering the question. Now, as you can see in the diagram, 98% chose the regular buffet containing meat, and only 2% chose the vegetarian meat or the vegetarian dish. And this was actually a conference which addressed health issues, including people eating too much meat. Now, in the other group, they were given what is called a vegetarian default signal. So that meant that participants were told that at the conference, a vegetarian buffet would be served for lunch, and then they could state if they wanted to have a non-vegetarian dish prepared for them. Now, as you can see in the right part of the diagram, in this group, 87% chose a vegetarian meal. So this is a sort of a nudge. It involves a series of behavioral insights, including hyperbolic discounting, where people ask 14 days in advance, playing on the fact that the future doesn't really have that much impact on current decisions. Also, there is this normative signal contained in the default descriptions, plus some more small additional insights that I'm not going to go into here. Now, we have done this several times. We've done it a lot of times, this experiment, actually replicated it over and over again. And on average, we find that we go from 6% vegetarians in the control group to 87% people eating vegetarian in the intervention group. So we have a nice, robust result, and we can go down into the details, exploring how genders are affected differently. And then we can also look into the approval, where people actually tend to like quite a lot this idea of influencing their behavior through a nudge, even if it's about their food. As you can see, there's an 85% approval of this. And that's after having read through a heavy description on how this nudge works. We can also do iterations, which are about neutral conditions. What if we ask people to choose one or the other buffet? And we get intermediate results. So this is basically very much shows how a nudge works and how you can work with nudges, and in a way that most of you will recognize from various videos, various materials, conferences, and descriptions online of behavioral insights and nudging. Now, ultimately, we want this to influence society, and this particular series of experiments with the vegetarian default has actually been incorporated into the knowledge base of an initiative in the US called Greener by Default, which uses this study, amongst others, to get people to eat more plant-based throughout various settings at workplaces, in healthcare, in schools, and so on. And you can Google Greener by Default, and you will find their interesting project here. So that's a nice story, but there's also a history behind nudging and behavioral insights, a history that most of you know.
But still, I will go through it in 10 minutes, very quickly, skipping a lot of stuff, leaving a lot of things out, just to get everybody on the same baseline, but also to shape the foundations for what I'm going to say afterwards. So, the history of nudging and behavioral insights is a history about the perception of humans being rational. I won't go into the depths of rationality means, but it's basically just means that people act consistently and coherently, so they don't contradict themselves in their thoughts and action. It also means by implication that people always attend to what is important. They always use all available information to form coherent beliefs. They maximize the subjective expected welfare through choices given these beliefs. They have no problems with determination. They experience the world more or less as it is, and they can introspect perfectly. That means you can look inside yourself and you can kind of monitor your thoughts, and you can recount how you were thinking and what you were thinking about and the reasons for what you were doing. Now, I can see there are some steps missing here in the graphics, but this leads in traditional public policy making to a way of regulating human behavior. You know, you have the perception that people are rational, and then from this there flows a certain way of regulating human behavior. This makes up a regulatory staircase where usually you see authorities beginning with informing people about what to do. Then if that's not enough, you start to persuade them. All of this is kind of okay. It's in the green. People are not very much against that. But if it's still not enough, you can move up to positive and negative incentives. And here reception starts to turn yellow. People become more reluctant, especially if they have to pay taxes due to a certain behavior. And then finally, on the regular traditional intervention staircase, you go up into legal measures like prohibiting or banning certain behaviors. So this is kind of a rational way of approaching regulation. Then we have basically a slide which is very messed up due to the formatting going badly here. So I apologize about that, but I will try to explain. What we have is that when we try to regulate using the behavioral intervention staircase, we have a series of things not turning out as they were supposed to do. We might increase the price of a certain behavior, but then people might actually seek it out more. We might ban a certain type of behavior, but that might actually make what people ends up doing then, because they want to challenge the bans. They might disregard information, for instance, that smoking kills. So there are certain deviations from what we call rational behavior, what we would expect from a rational model of behavior. So we observe certain types of behavior which are not in accordance with rationality. Now, all of this has a history in economics, because economics is one of the disciplines where we have been exploring the details of rationality in very rigid ways through mathematics, for instance. And we have Herbert Simon pointing out that the ideas from economics about human things are simply too unrealistic. Nobody thinks the way that economist models decision-making in math. Now, economists have responded to this saying, like, but we're just pretending that consumers and citizens are rational, so people act as if they did the math. We don't mean that they are doing it, they just act as if. Now, Thomas Schelling, a later pioneer in economics and a Nobel laureate, then pointed out that people don't even act as if they were rational. And in fact, they could act in ways that rational agents couldn't do, but which were more optimal than rational agents. And he was, Thomas Schelling was a very renowned economist, but people really didn't know what to do with his results because they were so profound. So we had a third wave challenging standard economics, which were initiated by Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, who pointed out that people tend systematically to make certain mistakes in their reasoning and judgment and decision making. Now, they call these deviations from what is rational for biases, cognitive biases. So basically, cognitive biases mean systematic deviations from the rational model due to psychological factors. And Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman studies such deviations, and they did it through what is called their biases and heuristics program, exploring very famously the availability bias, the bias called anchoring and adjustment, and representativeness, which is a form of stereotypical thinking. Then they also famously developed prospect theory, which consists in two legs, the probability weighting function and the value function. It's from here that some of you will know words like losses looms larger than gains, that is loss aversion, which have become a very famous concept. Also stuff like risk aversion and risk-seeking behavior has been studied empirically and modeled in their work. So Kahneman and Tversky kind of showed that there are certain problems with the predictive force in classical economics, which led to a certain type of crisis. But if you want to challenge a paradigm truly, then you need a psychological theory. And a lot of people have heard about system 1, system 2 theory, which have been used as a metaphor in Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, very famous book. Now, what you should know out there is that Kahneman is, and he never claimed to be, the original author of what we call dual process theories in cognitive psychology. Now, this theory is mainly borrowed, but also developed by Kahneman in important respects, but it's borrowed from a series of psychologists, including Evans and Stanovich and others. And I really encourage those of you working with behavioral insights and nudging to read these psychologists, because they have a very detailed way of talking about dual and triple process theories, which are just as relevant for the behavioral insights practitioners as good anatomy is to a doctor. So most of people will know that Kahneman is kind of using this system 1, system 2 metaphor to explain the results, the biases that he and Tversky found. And then we have this beautiful young man, Richard Thaler, coming into the picture, meeting Kahneman early in his career, learning from him, and starting himself to identify a lot of biases and heuristics in decision-making, and especially looking into first everyday problems, but then later on applying the insights to really hard real-world problem. So, for instance, he worked with Shlomo Banatzi on the Save More Tomorrow program that a lot of people have heard about within pensions, which builds upon the work of Brigitte Madrian. And here, Thaler and Shlomo Banatzi identified two psychological factors influencing decision-making about pension, namely hyperbolic discounting and loss aversion in particular, which explains why a lot of people find it difficult to save for pension. The future doesn't matter that much, and if you have to give up some of your salary now to gain something in the far future, it's a very difficult decision to make for people. So then they developed the Save More Tomorrow program, which basically told people that if you join this program, you won't have to save anything now, but next time you get a salary increase, we'll take a part of that and put it into your pension fund, and we'll do this automatically. In this pension program, what they did was actually they used the behavioral insights, these psychological factors, some of which were preventing the wanted behavior or the preferred behavior. They used those behavioral insights to get people to save more for tomorrow, because putting away funds which are allocated in the future is not difficult, exactly due to hyperbolic discounting. It also means that if you take it from salary increases, you'll never experience loss aversion. It works by default, so you don't have to make a decision. And when you take the money away from your from your salary increase, it comes from a particular mental account which you're not that connected to, and you feel like if you find money on the street, you can use them for something fun, or you can use them for pensions. So this is actually what we call a diagnostic link, where Richard Thaler and Shlomo Banatzi connects their program to a diagnosis of the problem that people face in the situation. It is a very instructive example. Now, Along comes Cass Sunstein, who is a brilliant and famous legal scholar, and he's in Chicago, where Richard Thaler also works, though at another institution. They join forces and they start to write a series of papers about what they call libertarian paternalism. Now, libertarian paternalism is the idea that we can actually guide citizens' behavior and choices without using harsh measures from paternalistic style of regulation or just leaving them alone. So we can actually actively guide them, thus giving them their freedom and keeping in safe distance from the citizens, but still guiding them in a somewhat paternalistic way, having an idea about what's good to do for them. At least to begin with, that's the thought of Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein. But soon after publishing at the beginning of these papers, they find out that perhaps they shouldn't define welfare as what is a societal perception of welfare, but they should rather define welfare as what people believe themselves to be good for them. Now, this idea then develops into a book, the famous book called Nudge: Improving Decisions About Health, Wealth, and Happiness. And their libertarian paternalism is connected to the concept of nudge, which very famously is taken to mean that a nudge is any aspect of the choice architecture, that's the situation that people make choices in, that alters people's behavior in a predictable way without forbidding any options or significantly changing their economic incentives. Now, the careful reader will see that this is actually not a definition of a nudge. It only tells us what a nudge is not. And actually, it turns out, skipping a very complex discussion here, it turns out that this is more a description of what a nudge looks like if it's framed within libertarian paternalism, because you can always also have nudges outside of people's sphere of interest. You might have an online casino trying to nudge you to lose your money. And actually, you can also have nudge interventions being part of harder regulation, but we're not going to go into that right now. But facing the complexities, they also say that a nudge should be regarded as any factor that significantly alters the behavior of humans, even though it would be ignored by econs. And that means that, for instance, information is not a nudge, because an econ would pay attention to relevant information. So that also alters the behavior of an econ. So nudges are more like the interventions or the parts of interventions that shouldn't matter in principle. That is from the perspective of rationality, but does matter to human behavior in practice. That is from the perspective of psychology. So nudges are these psychological features that you can weave into regulation. And we know a lot of them: simplicity, loss aversion, and so on, in order to get the regulation to connect better with human psychology. Now, this is then connected to a movement which has actually existed in the UK since the 70s. This is a movement for evidence-based policy. David Halpern, whom I doesn't have a picture of here because he looks so much better than me, so I thought that would be a shame to bring him in here. David Halpern is leading a center in the UK, and then that center develops into the Behavioural Insights team, which to begin with is part of the UK government, but then rolls out to become the Behavioural Insights unit as we know it today, or the Behavioural Insights team as we know it today, global consultancy, which advises based on early work, especially the Mindspace report and the newer shape of this called EAST, where they advise all over the world in how to very quickly develop interventions that might have an impact. And in general, they are spearheading a development towards a behavioral insights movement that spreads around the world and develops all sorts of initiatives and programs in governments throughout the world with more or less success based on behavioral insights. And when it's put into policy, it's it's been referred to as behavioral public policy. And there's also a very good association for behavioral public policy today that you can check out. But then comes the crisis that I wanted to tell you about. Now, this is from a paper that I like very much by Michael Halsworth, who is today leading the North American Behavioural Insights team, part of the UK Behavioural Insights team. And he talks about it in a paper in Behavioural Public Policy, the most important journal in this area, I would say, that we really haven't seen the revolution that we expected to see. We don't see a more wide-ranging reassessment of public administration that could be possible. Now, Michael has his explanations of this, but my kind of take on it is that in the yellow boxes, you see some of the problems we see in the approach. One of them is discussions about what is a nudge and what is not a nudge, where people are not theoretically rigid enough. They just want to get started. They just want to apply stuff. They just want to make results. But actually understanding the theory behind behavioral insights is, for many people, seen as something which is not necessary. And I think that's one of the cause of the problem. But we also see that a lot of units fails to replicate the results of other units, or fail to get results from results made in academia. Then we have the problem where I say, like, kind of the lack of the more wide-ranging impact that Halsworth also notices. If we were supposed to have this big revolution in terms of behavioral insights, it's really difficult to see, because whenever you really enter serious decision-making in government, you will still only find economists, lawyers, and comms people in there. You won't find many behavioralists. Then there are discussion about behavioral insights being too libertarian or too paternalistic. This is basically behavioral public policy kind of ending up in discussions with traditional politics. It's also an area of a problem. Then there is the whole recognition that behavioral insights is more than nudges, but what is it then? Which is also a discussion. And then I think the biggest problem we have is that in all these confusions, we have had a lot of consultants popping up wanting to do something they call behavioral design, which is a sort of watering down of behavioral insights. Not always, because sometimes people just use the words because it's kind of an easy word to understand. But a lot of people also just take behavioral insights and use it as kind of a background against which they do business as usual, just adding some stuff from design thinking and other things, which means that there's a lot of confusion about how you work with behavioral insights. So this brings us to chapter 3, where I think it's time that we examine the crisis a bit more in order to understand it, because then we also understand how we can solve this crisis. And one of the things which is very important to understand is that behavioral insights and nudging rests on scientific foundations. Now, in science, we have a concept called paradigms. It comes from Thomas Kuhn. Now, a paradigm is the idea that when humans seek out knowledge, then our search for knowledge is driven by a knowledge interest. In the case of behavioral insights and nudging, it's about how we can regulate behavior and coordinate behavior in ways which are human. Now, that knowledge interest is translated into a practice. In traditional public policy making, that practice is traditional regulation using information, incentives, and law. Now, behind every practice, there is a theory. And behind traditional public policy, the theory is that people are rational. Now, a theory is basically an ontology. It says what exists and how it exists. So in the rational methodology or the rational paradigm, you would assume that people are rational and they tend to act in a rational way. And on top of this, the theory also says they have perfect introspection, which lead to a methodology where you use introspection to understand why people are doing what they're doing. So you use interviews, you use surveys, and so on. Now, this is called a paradigm. And a paradigm is a configuration of practice, theory, and methodology in the service of a knowledge interest. Now, according to Kuhn, we also have something called pre-science and a Kuhnian cycle, which means that often our first attempts at developing science is built upon everyday understandings, like folk psychology, folk physics, and folk medicine. And then it develops into some sort of a scientific discipline, which becomes structured. And then after some years, or decades, or centuries, anomalies will turn up where the theories turn out to not predict very well or explain phenomena very, very well. And to begin with, people try to repair the paradigm, but ultimately they end up with a revolution where they changes to a new way of looking at the phenomena they're studying. That means they're kind of taking out the theory of the paradigm, putting a new one in, which also means that you're making changes in methodology and so on. All of this is very abstract, so here is a simple example. We have me standing in Denmark. Denmark is extremely flat. It's just a sandbank north of Germany, actually, and I'm watching the sun. And the sun will go up in east every morning and down in west. So I will have the folk psychological experience that the earth is flat and the sun revolves around the earth. This might give rise, as it did in history, to the idea that the Earth was in the center of the universe and everything revolved around it. Now, for those of you who knows your history of science, it turned out to be the wrong theory. It was noted due to some anomalies. Mars was running the wrong way. Suddenly, it didn't run in circles. But then somebody tried to repair the paradigm with the Earth in the middle, saying that Mars was running on a circle on circles. And then other planets didn't behave well either. And the paradigm was repaired with Mars and other planets running on circles, running on circles, running on circles. So everything could be kept circular and the Earth in the middle until things started to unravel and we started to say, let's change the theory. Perhaps Earth might not be in the center of the universe. It might be the sun. And then the theory started to work better. So we had a paradigm shift. So we went from folk psychology or folk astronomy into a basic theory, which experienced a revolution, and then we got into our current worldview. That's a very simplified story, I know, but actually it's the same thing that we see going on in behavioral insights and nudging. Here we have a practice which is the traditional intervention ladder. We have a theory of the rational agent, and we have methodologies based on introspection. But the thing is, when we go into behavioral insights, it is actually, if we want to understand it correctly, it is a paradigm shift. It is, as you can see down here, Kahneman and Tversky noticing that there are certain anomalies together with a lot of other scholars, then saying that we have a problem, Houston. We actually cannot predict human behavior with the existing methodologies. To begin with, they tried to repair it, but ultimately they opted for a different theory of human agency, namely dual process and triple process theories. Now, what a lot of people fail to see is that that also means a change in methods. Namely, that we have to study human behavior in a different way. And most people working within the paradigm knows of randomized controlled trials, but that's just one of the ways, one of the methodological implications of changing to dual and triple process theories. Another implication is, for instance, that people really know very little about their own behavior. So the whole idea of doing qualitative interviews, focus groups, and all the other stuff that people tend to do, especially in design thinking, is actually really badly adapted to dual and triple process theories. So when people try to connect the wrong methods with a theory, then it doesn't work very well. And that's part of why we're seeing a crisis right now in the paradigm, because people are trying to do business as usual, that is, use the standard methodologies based on a theory that it really doesn't work well with. So it means that they're actually lingering between two paradigms, and that's basically the thing behind the crisis. But if we get it right, we also get new practices. My favorite is the OECD framework called BASIC. I'm biased. I wrote it, but I really like it because it's diagnostic. And then basically when we go through such a paradigm shift where we change the theories, the methodologies, and the practice, then we also end up with adding behavior in front of a lot of the traditional stuff. We have behavioral communication, behavioral economics, behavioral law, behavioral finance, behavioral marketing, behavioral healthcare, and so on. So when we talk about the shift to the new paradigm, we also talk about behavioral insights with a large B and a large I. Because then we're talking about the whole movement, and then we have the individual behavioral insights which are contained within the movement, which is all these cognitive biases and so on that we use to understand behavior with. Now, that's the very important thing to kind of notice, that we are actually in a paradigm shift. And a lot of people fail to see this. They just want to do business as usual, and then add behavioral insights and nudging as these kind of complements where you can just do as you usually do, use the methods that you usually do, and then tweak it with some 9 out of 10. But that's not how it works. If we really want the value from behavioral insights and nudging, we really need to adopt the full paradigm. So what does that mean? Should we get a revolution? I don't like revolutions. We should have silent revolutions. So I suggest that what we should aim for is getting to a revolution on what we call Neurath's boat. What that means is that we are like sailors who on the open sea must reconstruct our ship, but are never able to start afresh from the bottom. Where a beam is taken away, a new one must be at once put there. And for this, the rest of the ship is used as support. That means that we have to rework all of public policy while standing on existing public policy. It's a difficult journey and it's a difficult task. It means that we need to respect what exists, but also need to take out stuff and say we need to do this in a new way. For me in my work, it sometimes means that a policymaker or minister might come up with a survey and saying that people want this or are acting like that. And I have not only to explain the minister about how statistic works, but also about how the human mind works. For instance, we had during the COVID-19 pandemic, we had ministers regulating on the assumption that they could measure behavior about how often you would sanitize your hands based on surveys. Now, when you sanitize your hands, that information is not stored in episodic memory, and that means that you can actually not report on it in a survey, meaning that people are making up their answers, and we could show this. So it actually means, as a practitioner in behavioral insights, that you have to challenge in a very nice way the existing assumption of public policy, especially about human behavior and how we work with human behavior. And you have to do that consistently. And we call this the behavioral turn. And it includes that you need, in order to do these challenges, you need to know something specific about theory, about dual process theory, about the methodology. It's like you cannot work with human behavior in a scientifically based and evidence-based ways if you're not doing an attempt to work to understand what goes on. Now, one of the ways you can work with behavioral insights, and I really love this way, is by nudging. But a nudge is not the intervention as such. A lot of people say, like, is this a nudge or is that a nudge? But a nudge is more like a toning or kind of a way of talking. So it's playing on psychological factors. So you might actually introduce a fee, for instance, but formulate it in a way so that people react differently to it than if you have formulated it in another way. So the formulation of the fee is a nudge, but the fee is not a nudge. Now, you need to understand this complex stuff in order to work with it. Of course, it's trivial to say if you're going to work with something in practice, you need to know the skill. But we see too few people actually going into that kind of skill and instead just applied it, nudging very superficially. But nudging, if you understand it quite well, you can actually use this as one of the 4 pillars in behavioral insights, and it's the one that I prefer. The other 3 pillars are push. That's just when you say, okay, humans are humans, but we are going to do rationality-based politics. So we're just going to increase the fines, make more bans, and provide people with amounts of information until they get it. It's not very effective or elegant, but it is a way that you can kind of force your way through. Nudge is much more elegant. You look at how the intricate kind of strings of regulation is woven together, and then you try to nudge it in responsible way and ethically transparent ways so that people connect better with regulation. This increases the effectiveness and the ease of regulation, and also means that you don't need to go into hard measures, and if you do it right, you respect people. A third pillar is boost. Boost is when you train people to understand how they work and how their surrounding works. You provide them with information and training, and you also adjust parts of the way you address people to their cognitive skills. It's a complex area, but it's very important to observe as well. And it is one that increases the capacity of humans, their skills and the knowledge and their competence. And then finally, we have the protect paradigm, which is about regulation that protect citizens from being exploited by people working with nudges, for instance, in the private sector, but it could also be in the public sector, that you put down protection of the individuals so they are not exploited by psychological manipulation, for instance. Now, when you then work with these approaches, whether it's nudge or one of the other 3, we see a tendency for people to just fire in the blank, but you need to perceive the practice of working with behavioral insights as nudging as very similar to that of a doctor. You need to understand why people are doing what they're doing from a cognitive perspective before you're intervening. You shouldn't just make various blind attempts at twisting and tweaking regulation and then seeing what works best and then, adapting on that. No, you should understand what people are doing and why they're doing that before you intervene. One way of doing that is, of course, the basic approach, which I like, as I told you, is where you first identify behavior, then you analyze the behavior, then you develop those strategies to fit your behavioral analysis so you're not firing blanks. And then you do the intervention to test. And then ultimately, if it works, you start to implement and scale in the change phase. Now, I recently heard somebody who said they were a behavioral scientist who hadn't paid attention to this framework because as a consultant, it was just too difficult to go into OECD's homepage and read up on the report, which is free there. No, it needed something more fast. It might be true for the type of consumer or client he was working with. That might be. But if you work in government and you have been invested with the authority from the people, with the trust, you need to orient yourself also when things become difficult. This is just one framework of several diagnostic frameworks out there, but I really suggest you go to the OECD homepage and you download the report. Finally, there's ethics, huge area. I'm not going to go much into it. Traditionally, we have had the debate between utilitarians saying like we can do whatever we want to, if I caricature it a bit, as long as we get good results, against the Kantian deontological tradition saying like we should respect the individual. I do see that in the long run, what we need is to develop a particular branch of ethics, which is based on Aristotelian virtue ethics. Ultimately, we want the citizen to grow, to become more competent, and to become more critical. Working with the citizen as a human being through nudge and boost and protect is what allows this to happen. We shouldn't talk about individual freedom as the right to never be guided or intervened or interacted with. We shouldn't talk about ethics as just what is good in the long run, no matter if people like it or not. No, we should look into virtue ethics and connect that with nudging and boosting and protecting. That would be the right way to go. For those of you interested in ethics, you know what I mean. For those of you who are not that interested in ethics, it's okay. There will be other people looking into this. But I just needed to talk a bit about ethics because it's so important. With that said, I'm going to end the very fast walkthrough in this keynote here, but I hope that I have provided you with a good and reasonable and useful roadmap. Otherwise, you'll get the slides, I'm pretty sure, later on with some additional notes. So thank you for now. Thank you for listening.
Yep. Thank you very much, Mr. Pella. It has been very insightful presentation. My only worry is that probably we don't have enough time to provide questions coming in. So let's move on quickly with our discussion. I would like to invite Mr. Faisal Naru as our discussant. So we are left with only 15 more minutes at our disposal. Over to you, Mr. Faisal Naru.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Pele. As always, excellent presentation and lots of things I'm sure that many people are thinking about. If I could maybe start, Pele, just by asking, first of all, I think what you've done really well is you've really laid out the land for people here about the issue at the moment. And you're right, it's a very popular term, behavioral insights. It's something that lots of people think about, and it's an easy thing for people to think that they know about. But I think what you're quite clearly demonstrating is that it's not. And it's something that requires a bit more understanding. And one of the things that I'd be interested in your take about this is that some people, when they initially look at this, and this maybe describes why, if you like, as you said, there's been a bit of a crisis in some of the behavioral circles, is that some people describe this as being marketing rebranded, and that this is nothing new. I mean, what do you say about those kind of things that sometimes people say that you just need a traditional marketing consultant to come in and to do this kind of work? What do you normally say, I think, to those kind of people who think that this is something that's quite easy to do?
Well, I usually say that my bad students at the university go to marketing. My good students go to the public sector. In marketing, you have to convince somebody buying a piece of chocolate. That's the easiest thing to do ever. In public policy, you need to convince people to go for a run. And in a way where it doesn't make sense, you're not running away from anything. You're not chasing anything either. So it's very unnatural to go for a jog, right? And so what government is often trying to do is that they're trying to coordinate human behavior and to develop human behavior. So it's actually the difficult type of behavioral change. When I get old and I don't want to work on hard problems anymore, I'll go to marketing as well. So it also means that when you have to swim upstream, you need different techniques than when you have to swim downstream. Anybody who have ever sailed a sail ship knows this, that sailing, with the wind is just, you just put up the sail. You don't need to know anything about winds or how to sail a ship, but you have to sail against the wind. Then you need technique. So you need a lot of techniques when you work with true behavioral problems and not just with marketing. I'm pretty sure that somebody is annoyed about me saying it like that, but well, it's online and you can't get me, so.
Indeed, I think, and I guess part of the reason why you're saying that it's you're dealing with more complex issues, and with more complex issues, you need a better toolkit and you need better technique. And one of the things as well that I think was quite striking from what you were saying, particularly talking about some of the techniques that are used, things like focus groups or surveys or things like that. Is that the argument often put forward is that, but all of these things provide information, they provide evidence. But I guess what you're saying, and what many of us often say to people, is that not all evidence is usable, not all evidence is reliable. And if you are basing decisions, you need to make sure that the evidence that you're having are things that can be used reliably by decision makers, and you're trying to feed that in. I mean, what would you say about that evidence argument, and the fact that sometimes people say, well, we maybe don't have time to do a 10-year study, we don't have time to do a huge thing, we're in the world of politics and public policy, we need to have answers tomorrow. I mean, what would you say about the compromising of evidence for that public sector decision making?
I would say that there's several things to say. One of them is I remember the first time I read Timothy Wilson's Strangers to Ourselves, which is one of the classics in behavioral science, which is about how little people know about themselves. A modern version of this, which people should also read, is Nick Chater's The Mind is Flat. So basically, when you go into behavioral science, we learn that people know very little about themselves. And a lot of what they're saying in standard interviews, if you don't do it the right way, will just be noise. Now, you will work longer on a problem if you're basing your efforts on noise than if you're basing it on little but good data. So sometimes people are saying, like, we don't have time for science. That's fine. Then you can work for 10 years failing, and then you can call me. That's usually what is going on. I'm kind of currently we're working at hospitals. People are saying, like, we didn't have time for science. They said that before COVID-19. Now they're starting to say perhaps we should work with it because we haven't solved the problems. And what usually happens is that you go into these scenarios and you start to work with behavioral science, you can actually solve the problem a lot of times. So I see it like it's not a choice, but some people have to learn the hard way that they have to fail a lot before they turn to science.
And I guess that science, people start to see quite easily or quickly that, like you're mentioning, if it's in health, because of everybody's gone through a pandemic, everybody's thinking quite carefully about health policy. People think about other kinds of health or social policies. But I'm assuming that many of the audience members here, particularly if they're coming from METI, they're thinking about economic policies. They're thinking about things like investment, trade. They're thinking about productivity. Where does the science come into those things? Because again, people would say, well, we just need to have a look at the numbers, and surely that's all we need to do. Where does the science come into those economic policies, which I guess is one of the areas where there hasn't been as much behavioural insights as maybe some people would have liked to have seen?
Yeah, so there I briefly mentioned the Safe More Tomorrow study by Shlomo Bonacci and Richard Thaler, which is this beautiful, beautiful casework. If anybody is interested in economic applications of behavioral science, that would be my first and foremost study to attend to, because it has the diagnosis in there. And it has been one of the things where, being rolled out, it has gotten a lot of people who never saved for pension to save for pension, which is extremely important for the economic health of a society, because it turns into investment and so on. In Denmark, I've been working with the Danish Competition and Consumer Authorities for years. And the group out there have done terrific work on trying to get rid of these what you in the States they're called payday loans. So basically make sure that people are not taking up bad loans. Also, protecting consumers online is a thing, because traditional law has difficulties managing the fact that humans are humans. So in traditional law, you would say, like, you ought to have read the terms and conditions, so as a consumer, you're responsible. But in a behavioral science perspective, you can actually show that the consumer cannot be held responsible. So I remember actually one conference many years ago with the consumer authorities in the Scandinavian countries. We had asked them to register for the conference, but in the terms and conditions, it said that if they registered for the conference, they agreed to be sitting with clown noses on for the whole conference. And everybody except one of the lawyers had spotted this. Nobody had spotted it, right? Only one had spotted it. But nobody wanted to sit with their noses, because we thought that we had cheated them. And in the same reflection, that also means that consumers can be cheated. And this is actually being worked into Danish law right now, so that consumers which are being cheated deliberately by online marketers are actually being punished by the legal system based on behavioral insights. So they are there, but it's difficult because people don't like you doing experiments with money. And they think that might, turn out bad. But there are a lot of places where, working with behavioral insights, when things really matters, have been proven to really, work well. And my favorite example is, of course, that I think we are holding the world record in designing boarding systems for A380. Right. So that's really matter. It's a very expensive system, and our system is adopted. It's based on behavioral science.
Well, and I get, and one of the things that I've been a big fan of the work there, and in particular, a big advocate around the need to rethink regulatory approaches and rethink things like terms and conditions, and really start to have that user base knowledge. Because as you've quite clearly seen, as you quite clearly said, if people either they don't notice or they simply just don't care about the terms and conditions for coming to a conference. What on earth are in our terms and conditions for mobile phone contracts or for our financial products, or even when you simply make a purchase in a shop, all of those kind of things. And from a policy-making perspective, if you are thinking about markets, and if you are thinking about economic growth, and you are thinking about the circulation of money, and how you want to encourage people to spend and invest and things like that, those kind of things end up being barriers that a lot of people don't necessarily think about, because it's just the done thing. It's business as usual, as you said. It's business as usual to have terms and conditions. But what are they really there for? And are they acting as a barrier towards the kind of activity that a country wants? Or are they something that are actually enabling the kind of behavior that you want? And I guess that's where the science comes into it again, is to be able to assist in there. I know we only have 4 minutes left, Pele, and you did mention ethics. And I think it's worth just spending a few minutes, I think, on the ethical part of this this excellent talk, because I think for lots of people, this is giving them a bit of either clarity, maybe some confusion, but hopefully reorientation of what behavioral insights is. And in terms of ethics, of course, one of the biggest, I guess, accusations that's always levied towards behavioral insights and towards nudging is that it's a form of manipulation, that it's there to try and make people do things that they don't want to do in a very secret and candid way, and a scientific way, which then makes people even more worried. I mean, how worried should people be about the ethics, and what is it that behavioral insights practitioners should do to ensure that those ethical considerations are taken care of?
Well, I think I think people should be worried. That's kind of perhaps the surprising answer. Now, if you put authority in the hands of others, you should always be worried and be careful about how that is used. And that also means that you should act with a certain responsibility and humility if you're being given that power to guide people. And that means you need to be caring, and you need to be trying to get people to grow for the right reasons and so on. Now, nudging can be manipulation. You can choose wordings, for instance, so that people make certain decisions, and then by making that decisions, gain the responsibility for a decision you're actually getting them to make. In Denmark, we recently had a vote from government on whether to join a part of EU legislation, and it was framed in a way which was basically manipulative. We showed this through a series of experiments that we could actually, by changing the formulation on the vote, we could get 13% of voters to change their opinion within subjects. So it was the same person first saying yes and then saying no to the same proposal within 1 minute. This shows something about the fragility of kind of the vote. Now, this means you need to adhere to certain rules when working with behavioral insights, where you opt for methods and you opt for behavioral insights that gets the attention of people when relevant, nudge them to have the right sort of considerations, so that you're actually not only preserving freedom, but you're also promoting freedom. And then you need to stay away from those nudges which works in a way which is not transparent to the citizens, so they don't know what is going on and why they're making their decision. Now, some people think that nudges work best in the dark, so that if you notice them, then they don't work anymore. That's simply not true. To the contrary, if you notice them and if you agree, they work better. There's some stuff written about this. There's some stuff written about it in the OECD basic report as well. I refer people to, together with other things, paying very much attention to when you're working experimentally with poor or vulnerable people. There are certain things you need to think about when you're intervening in other people's lives to ensure that you're respecting other people's lives and not intervening without due cause.
Gentlemen, I really hope that there will be a second part to this discussion. Because since we're talking about science just now, how I wish that we would also get into the realm of information science, because in era where we have big data, is all this big data and profiling, is it boon or bane to nudging and behavioral insight? But since we don't have time, so I really hope that the organizer is considering to bring both of you back somehow, maybe an online session or what. But Mr. Faisal Naru will have his own session afterwards. And thank you very much to Mr. Pelle Galbult Hansen and also Mr. Faisal Naru. And we have to move to our subsequent session, which is the forum or the breakout session. So coming up next, we'll have 3 parallel sessions that will be conducted live online. And each session will focus on different topics, so you can choose the one that interests you the most. To join one of the 3 parallel sessions, you will need to log into the conference platform and select the session of your choice. Each session will have its own virtual room, so that we can have a session where we can interact with the speaker and our participants. So you can choose your session based on your interest, and we hope that if you have trouble in deciding which session to choose, let me remind you again, session 1 is entitled Designing and Evaluating Policy. Stream 2, session 2 is entitled Enhancing Existing Policy and Regulation. As for stream 3, the title is Changing Behavior Through Nudge. For those who are watching this live via Facebook and wish to remain so, we will be sharing live session stream 2. And if you wish to follow the other 2 sessions, we'll have to go to the portal, to the website, so that you'll be able to choose stream 1 and 2. Please look for Behavioural Insights 2023.tamingtech.my. There are live session buttons that you can follow any of the 3 sessions by clicking the sessions options. So our streaming session will begin now. I'll give a breather of maybe perhaps 30 seconds or so that we can settle down and give some time for everyone to choose their respective sessions. So for those who wish to follow stream 2, you can remain following us via live Facebook. Similarly, those who choose to join the other sessions, you can also go to the portal mentioned earlier. So I'll give a breather of 30 seconds so that we get everything ready before we begin our session. And if you remain on live Facebook show, that means we are about to begin our session 2, which will be talking about the enhancing existing policies. So welcome back. Moving on to our breakout session. There'll be 3 streaming sessions running concurrently, and you are now in stream 2, where the focus of the discussion is enhancing existing policy and regulation. And for this session, we have 3 distinguished speakers. Allow me to introduce them one by one. Our first speaker is Ms. Camilla Chivers, the advisor, Office of Impact Analysis, OIA, Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, Australian Public Service. Welcome to the conference, Camilla. Camilla assists Australian government agencies to develop evidence-based assessment of the likely social and economic impacts of proposed reforms. Camilla completed her honours degree at the University of Sydney, where she examined the potential for behavioural and experimental economics to create more accurate economic frameworks. Camilla has also worked as a policy analyst at Grattan Institute, a prominent Australian public policy think tank, and as a political advisor to the Australian Senate. Welcome to the conference. Next, our second speaker is Ms. Susan Calvert, the Managing Director, Behavioural Economics Team of the Australian Government, BETA, Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, Australian Public Service. She has a scientific background and a career of experience in designing and delivering innovative evidence-based solutions to the most complex public policy problems. Over the last year, she has worked with the Office of the National Data Commissioner to implement the Data Availability and Transparency Act 2022 and to also enable data sharing for the benefit of Australian public. Welcome to the conference, Susan. And last but not least, our third speaker is Muhammad Shahid Ismail, Chief Executive Officer, Talent Search. Talent Search is a company that aims to fully realize talent and clients' potential. And in that process, they have been collecting and analyzing behavioral data for more than 10 years. Talent Search work with local universities on understanding the trend and the behavior of university students by analyzing data, strategize and prepare reports and plans for universities in helping students developing their talents. Shahidi conducts workshop with Institute Penyelidikan Tingkah Laku, also known as IPTK, with the attendance of World Health Organization participants and get to meet and collaborate with Dr. Tim Chadbourne, consultant for WHO and the head of BI unit in the UK. Before we begin, I'd like to also encourage all participants to share your thoughts and questions after each presentation, and you'll also be allowed to again ask questions after all presenters finish their presentation. And I would also like to remind each speaker that you are given 15 minutes each. So let's begin with the first speaker. I will now invite Ms. Camilla Chivas. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Camilla Chivas. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I do have some slides which, there they are. Thank you very much. Okay, everyone. It's wonderful to be a part of this conversation today. Thank you very much to the Malaysia Productivity Corporation for the invitation. And I have to say, wow, what a phenomenal keynote speech and a great way to kick off. I'm glad that to be here and glad to, as I said, to continue the conversation. Before we start, a little bit of an introduction on my agency. I work for the Office of Impact Analysis. Our role is to help Australian ministries assess the costs and benefits of government policy. Every Australian government ministry comes through us when they're working on policy proposals for policy reform, and we help them make sure that decision makers understand the likely economic, social and regulatory impacts of government policy. For today, what I would like to do is spend a little bit of time focusing on core concepts in behavioural insights to lay the groundwork for the remainder of the conversation in this panel. And I'll also touch on how we can use behavioural insights to assess policy impacts before I hand over to my colleague who also works in the Australian government, Ms. Susan Calvert. So there are four main core concepts that I would like to talk to you about today. The first is that people don't always make rational choices. The second is that more information doesn't always help people make rational choices. The third is that people's choices depend on the context or the environment that they're in. And the fourth, most importantly, is that good public policy recognises these facts. It recognises that behavioural impacts are important to understanding what the likely impacts will be of a reform. So number one, people don't always make rational choices. Economists used to think people generally make choices according to their preferences. And so this was something that Mr. Pele drew out so expertly in his keynote. This was called rational choice theory. And the idea is that people will be able to weigh the pros and cons of a decision and make a decision that optimizes the benefits to them and minimizes the costs. But as we've heard, Behavioural Insights tells us that rational choice theory isn't always right. Sometimes as human beings, we want one thing. We want to be able to be fit, we want to be healthy, we want to be able to jog 5 kilometres every week without falling into a heap. But we do another. We eat donuts instead. I think that we can all relate to this, and it is part of the human condition that we tend to weigh immediate costs and benefits much more highly, much more strongly than we do for costs and benefits that are far off in the future. And this is called present bias. It's not necessarily rational, but it does mean that when we are making decisions, we can find it difficult to do what we actually want to do. There's what we actually want to do and then what we do, and there might be a gap between those two things. The second concept is that more information doesn't always help. So part of rational choice theory is that if people are making choices that aren't maximising the costs and benefits to them, that may be because they don't have full information about what those costs and benefits are. And so the assumption was, well, if we're eating donuts, it must be because we don't really understand that that's not good for us. Behavioural Insights actually says that the way that information is delivered to us matters. So it's not just having all of that information, but the way that it's delivered matters. And even if we did have full information, people still might not make a rational choice. In fact, sometimes having full information can be quite overwhelming, and actually it can make the decision-making more difficult. An example that I quite like in this space is related to the payment of parking fines. Australian governments, like many governments around the world, I'm sure, struggle to encourage people to pay traffic infringements or parking fines on time. And one of our governments, a municipal government, the New South Wales government in Australia, they noticed this. They noticed that people weren't paying their fines on time. They'd get the letter, they'd have a look, they'd throw the letter in the bin. All the information was there to say, if you don't pay this on time, you'll have a late fee. There could be even worse penalties applied, like losing your license. But people weren't noticing that. And so what the government did is they teamed up with a Behavioural Insights team in New South Wales, and they redesigned the style of the letter. They tried a few different types of styles. Ultimately, they found that having a big red stamp saying "Pay now" right on top of the letter, and using things like visual cues, colour coding to show the urgency of paying that fine, it increased response rates considerably. It meant about $1 million in increased revenue, and it prevented 9,000 people from losing their licenses or losing their car registration and not being able to drive. So more information is useful and more information is useful, but the way that it is communicated is important. Number 3, context matters to people's choices. And here I did want to pause and actually mention something that was drawn out in Mr. Pelle's keynote. It is common, I think, for people when introduced to Behavioural Insights to wonder, is it fair or is it right for the government to use Behavioural Insights to try to influence people's choices? And I agree with Mr. Pelle. I think that we should be very careful of that as policy analysts. We need to be cautious and we need to make sure that we're being respectful of what people's choices are. But I would make the point that as policy analysts, we do not get to opt out of having behavioural impacts from the reforms that we propose. Every reform will have behavioural impacts because nobody makes choices in a vacuum. The way that those parking tickets are delivered to people, the way that we communicate as policymakers, the types of things that we ask from people, that all of those things, the policy frameworks, will change the behavioural response from people. So the choice for us as policy analysts is not, will we have behavioural impacts? The choice is, will we use behavioural insights to understand those impacts? And will we make sure that we are using those behavioural insights to design policy that has behavioural impacts that push in the same direction as the government's objectives and not against that direction? And just quickly on this slide, one other thing that I would point out is that governments have long struggled to understand the importance of behavioural insights, but private companies have known the importance for a very long time. You only need to walk into a grocery store or your local supermarket and you will see behavioural insights playing out. That store manager, they will think very carefully about what products they put at your eye level, because they know if a product is at your eye level, you're more likely to put it in your cart, you're more likely to buy it. And that's because the store manager and private companies understand people's choices don't happen in a vacuum. So those are the 4 core points that I wanted to communicate about core concepts in behavioural insights. To recap, how people actually behave matters more than how they should behave. All government policy has behavioural impacts because people don't make choices in a vacuum. And to know the true costs and benefits of government policy, we need to recognise these behavioural insights. That brings me back to my agency, the Office of Impact Analysis. As I said earlier, our role is to make sure that Australian ministries are gaining a full picture of the likely costs and benefits of the proposed reform. And we're very aware that the success or failure of the policy intervention depends on how well it accounts for behavioural insights and behavioural impacts. So when an agency comes to us and says we are working on a proposal, we will ask them things like, how are you communicating that information? What are you expecting from business and consumers and individuals or community groups in order to comply with what you are asking for? What are the likely impacts going to be on the ground, not just in theory? Those are the sorts of things that we will ask. And the other thing that we do is we try to encourage ministries to design interventions that have minimal regulatory impact and strong positive economic or social impacts. And behavioural insights can be very useful for that. So just quickly, an example might be using a light nudge, which would be something that changes the context for people's decision making, but doesn't impose an extra regulatory burden for business. And in the Australian context, a really nice example of this is that our tax office recently implemented a reform to autofill tax forms for employees using data that the government already has. And that just makes it that little bit easier for people to be able to put in their tax form and comply with that rule. Other measures are things like putting health star ratings on food products to visually show consumers the nutritional value of a food product. And this is not to constrain consumer choice. Consumers can still make their choices. It's just that it's making it easier for them to be able to see if a product is healthy or unhealthy. And then a stronger response would would be, or a stronger intervention would be something like regulating businesses and consumers directly. And an example here would be some Australian jurisdictions require people to smoke in different areas in a public bar than you're allowed to eat. And that just adds a little bit of friction when you're at a table with your family or your friends in a public bar having dinner. If you want to have a cigarette, you can still do that, but you need to go somewhere else and smoke somewhere else and then come back when you're finished. So for each of these things, my agency, the Office of Impact Analysis, if we were looking at these, we would be looking at the likely behavioural response that the ministry is proposing to elicit, and then we would be looking at the likely benefits and the costs of those proposals. And I'll leave it there. I'm happy to take questions now or at the end of the panel, the presentations from the other panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Camilla Chivers from the OIA, Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet Australian Public Service. So while waiting, we welcome any question from our participants. But since, I have a question of my own, but let's give some time before we can get more questions from the participants. So I suggest that we move on first to our next presenter. I now invite Ms. Susan Calvert from Beta of the same department. So over to you, Susan.
Thank you, and thank you to the Malaysian Productivity Corporation for hosting this national conference on behavioural insights. I'm really enjoying it so far. Just share with you my role in the behavioural economics team of the Australian government. We are responsible for improving the lives of Australians by generating and applying evidence from the behavioural and social sciences to find solutions to complex policy problems. We're a team of about 30 people. We were established in 2016, and we sit in the Policy Innovation and Projects Division of the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet in the Australian Government. We aim to engage early in the policy cycle, and one of our key roles is to undertake primary research, to understand the problem that the policy problem government's facing, and to support the development of policy solutions, and then rigorously test those interventions. We work early in the issue identification phase, doing literature reviews, data analyses, survey work, and mainly qualitative work at this stage. And then we get very heavily involved in the policy design and testing those interventions in a co-design way through workshops and research, and also through randomised control trials and quasi-experimental efforts in data analysis. And we also get involved at the very end in the policy evaluation, so making sure the implementation actually worked in the field and looking at the impact of that evaluation. Right now, we're working very closely on Australian government priorities in the net zero space, in looking at making sure none of our citizens are left behind, and also to reduce the cost of living, which is an increasing problem when we look forward. In all of these areas, behavioural insights are very relevant, particularly in the net zero space. It's all about choice. And so we've been very highly sought after, the expertise of my team to assist in this spaces. But what I wanted to talk to you about today was one example which really fits well with the design of this conference. It's about online wagering. It's a recent project we've completed, and it really is a nudge which resulted in regulation without limiting people's choice. So and the other great thing about it is it's been a very strong collaboration between government and academia. It's a project done in partnership with our Department of Social Services and academics Ben Newell from the University of New South Wales, Swee Hoon Chua from the University of Tasmania, and Bob Sloanen from the University of Technology in Sydney. It shows the power of rigorous evidence in driving good policy outcome and how behavioural insights can really help in decision making. So online wagering, it's one of the fastest forms of gambling in Australia. It doubled from 2012 to 2018, and during COVID there was a huge uptick in gambling in Australia, and I suspect this is an international social problem. Of course, harm from gambling includes financial difficulties. It can lead to depression, relationship breakdown, and many other causes of harm. The problem with online gambling is just the ease of access and the speed at which you can make a bet. And it means it's really hard to keep track of how much has been spent. And this leads to a greater risk of gambling-related harm. Behavioural biases really help explain the choices we make when gambling. And we looked into the literature for key behavioural biases involved in online wagering that could lead to harm. Some of these here you'll be familiar with, like the gambler's fallacy, where people believe a win is more likely to follow a series of losses. And other biases that, for example, where people recall wins better than they recall losses. And of course, a big win is very exciting, and multiple smaller losses are less easily recalled because they're not so significant. Of course, we all believe that we're lucky in some way and that we have more influence than we have on the outcome of each bet. Lots of behavioural research shows that people are particularly sensitive to losses. So, for example, a loss of $100 is felt much more than an equivalent win of $100. And so we predicted, based on this understanding of behavioural bias and behavioural research, that if we provided an activity statement through the online gambling platform that really made clear the losses, it would reduce the amount that people gambled. What we did was then design some activity statements, and we did this based on interviews and focus groups, and we picked the two that were most likely to succeed based on that initial feedback. We used principles from the behavioural science to develop these, and you can see both statements show very clearly the amount people had spent, their wins and losses, and the net results over a given period. But the first statement there has a graph showing cumulative results over a period of time, and the other shows cumulative results in a table, much like a bank statement. So what we then did was test these on a group of what turned out to be 1,500 participants, and we randomised these into 3 groups, one a control group and then 2 experimental groups, which were shown the different activity statements. Ethics, of course, is very important in studies like this, and we screened out high-risk gamblers because of ethical reasons, and our study went through an ethics review process prior to its commencement. We didn't gamble in the real world. We actually developed a game, a gambling game, so it's a simulated gambling experiences. It meant people could bet on a horse race online. We gave them lab dollars, not real dollars, in their account at the beginning, and it was refreshed every 8 races. The player was allocated a horse and was shown the odds, and it varied for each race. And based on that, they made their choice about whether to bet, how much to bet, whether to sit out on this bet. And then they'd watch the horses gallop along the racetrack online. And at the end of the 8 races, all players were given a short break before the next round. While some players were only given time to rest, the other players that weren't in the control group were shown one of those 2 activity statements, and which reflected their betting behaviour over the last 8 races. And then they were then went into a schedule of the next 8 races. The races were won on computer-generated probabilities linked to the odds. So each player had a slightly different experience from every other player, and some had winning streaks, some had losing streaks, and more wins were had on lower odds. So really reflected well the real world. And what we found, the results of this trial, were that the statements caused the players to bet significantly less in total. So players who saw the statement with the graph, they bet 7.6% less than the control group. And those who saw the statement with the table, they bet 4.9% less than the control group. And what was really interesting was that for moderate risk gamblers, there was the largest impact there. So it was even a larger reduction in betting amounts for those who are moderate risk gamblers, and also gamblers who hold multiple false beliefs. So they were very surprised by the statistics. We also checked loss chasing behaviour. So that's the fact that the behaviour that if you have a series of losses, you continue on to offset those losses. So we worried that if they knew how much they were losing, they would keep betting. But we found that the statements didn't worsen loss chasing behaviour. In fact, they actually reduced it. When we spoke to the gamblers, they felt that experience was very real. These are some of the comments they made when we interviewed them after the trial. You know, they were really quite surprised to see how much they had lost. And, you know, it was quite daunting to them and quite shocking to them to think of that long-term effect, that they hadn't realised how much money they'd left over that time frame. So the outcome was that this was the activity statement that the trial showed was the most effective. And in July last year, the states and territories made it mandatory for online wagering companies to provide monthly activity statements to their customers using this design as a template. This is still being rolled out by our companies and needs to be implemented by mid this year. And then we will actually work and test the results actually in the real world, and our researchers are expecting actually a bigger increase because, of course, when you're playing a game, it's not real money, and you're also going to sit there doing nothing if you don't bet. So, but in the real world, you can do something else. So we're predicting an even better result in the real world, that people will gamble less based on their understanding, the increased knowledge that they've had. I think this project really showcases the way tools from behaviour sciences can be used to improve people's welfare without limiting their choices. And in this case, regulation is the vehicle to ensure people get the information they need, and so they can choose to bet within their budget. So that's a good example that we've been running with on beta, and looking forward to hearing more later in the sessions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Since both of you, Susan and Kamala, are coming from the same department, so what's the structure like? How does it work? You have OIA and also beta. So just a brief response, maybe perhaps from both of you before we move on to Shahidi. Kamala?
Yeah, that's right. So we work in the policy design phase of the government policy, and we are looking to actually make sure that the policies we implement are designed with behavioural insights in mind. And Camilla is doing a really great check. I'll let her explain what she does at the approval stage of a policy.
That's right. Thank you, Susan. So the OIA would come in at a later stage when a policy intervention is further along in its development process. So a ministry might be at the stage where they're ready to take a proposal to the executive of government for a final decision. That's when we would become involved, and we would look at the policy, look to see if the impacts are likely to be more than minor, and those impacts, as I said earlier, are either economic, social, or regulatory. And then that's if they are more than minor, that's when we would start to build an evidence base for the costs and benefits of that proposal.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that we already have a question from our participants. So let me put it up and share with our speakers. Which stage of the BI approach can be used for regulatory impact analysis process? Is it at the stage of finding options to solve the problem, or at the implementation strategy of the proposed solution?
Wow, what a fantastic question. I'm so glad that somebody has asked me about the RIA framework. That makes me delighted. So I would say that regulatory impact analysis should have behavioural insights the whole way through. Often, I think it's a problem if you come in towards the end when you've already developed your options and then try to apply a behavioural lens. Actually, what we should be doing is saying, let's design policy options and explore options to solve big complex policy problems using behavioural insights from the very beginning. And from our perspective, from an OIA perspective, that makes us very happy to see that happen, because it means that you're getting a full view of what all the impacts are likely to be, not just pure regulatory or economic impacts, but also social impacts as well.
Susan, would you like to add on to that?
Yeah, we do roll out training to build capability across the whole of the Australian public service in this, because it's so important when we're spending a lot of money on a new initiative to make sure we've designed it in a way that it can be evaluated effectively down the track. So we do a capability program in this space.
Okay. So to all the participants, you keep your questions coming in. We will have one more speaker to go. So while waiting for the questions from our participants, let's move on to our third speaker, Encik Muhammad Shahidi Ismail, the CEO of Tel and Search. Over to you, Shahidi. I think you are muted. Can you please unmute yourself? All right.
So sorry. Okay, thank you, Mr. Syed, for Ms. Susan and Ms. Camilla information. Mr. Syed is a popular and well-renowned moderator in Malaysia. He was the first to interview our new Prime Minister, PMX. So it is an honor to be to be in the same stage as Mr. Syed, and even towards our other panelists. So let me share my slides here. Basically, I'll be talking in 4 chapters. First, I'll briefly introduce Behavioural Insight in Malaysia. I'll also explain a bit on my approach on how to approach the stakeholders. My past project, one of the project is cashless at Tioman, and what is the way forward. Basically, BI is quite new in Malaysia. Behavioural Insight is fairly new. And I'm not going to repeat again what is the meaning of Behavioural Insight, but it is in Malaysia's 12th plan. So this will be adopted as a complementary tool to enhance government services to the rakyat. So government our government themselves has realized the importance of Behavioural Insight, and they want to use it in all the agencies and all the ministries. And MPC is the one handling Behavioural Insight. They are the agency appointed to spearhead the Behavioural Insight initiative in Malaysia. They have developed a few projects. They have their own framework. They have guidelines and etc. And I am one of the MPC associates, one of the consultants for MPC to mostly handle Behavioural Insight project. I'm also the founder and the CEO of Talent Search Sendram Berhad. You can check us on talentsearch.com. I've been passionate about behavioral data, and I am still very much passionate about behavioral data. And we are also always look at the overall development of a person and society since 2008. In 2008, I started my tuition center or education classes center. I was a kampung boy. Kampung is rural area, from a rural area, and I see that there are a lot of opportunity that are not being given to the rural people, to someone like me. We are not in the same, we don't really have the same chance. Trajectory is a bit different. So I've been thinking on ways to understand, to develop, and to at least help in improving the rural people chance. And that's the reason why I started Talent Search, where we play with the word talent search. And in the process, we've worked with universities, we have our own researchers, and we started the company officially in 2012. Now we have analyzed millions of data points. We have our own AI system, artificial intelligence system. We've developed sentiment analysis tools, and we focus mostly on behavioral data, on psychometric, and our issues ranging from profiling to issues such as social cohesion, issues such as hate speech, and etc. I became an MPC associate in 2020. The reason is because of this conference, the first conference. I don't even know that MPC has taken behavioral insight as one of the initiative. I've been a fan of behavioral economics, so I've read Taylor's Nudge, and to know that MPC has started focusing on behavioral insight, I jumped the gun. I went into the conference, sold myself, and I have become an MPC associate since 2020, and I have been involved in quite a few BI projects, ranging from used cooking oil to veteran armies to the BKL. A lot of issues, but I'll be sharing about cashless in Tioman today. Basically, I would like to share a bit of my approach to introduce BI and implementing BI, because basically this is quite new. And for us to approach, for MPC, to approach all the government agencies, to approach all the ministries, it is quite hard and it is quite daunting. First, you need to educate them on what is BI, and then you need to let them, be interested, want to do, want to apply. You need to have their full cooperation. And I believe there is a few approach that I can introduce. One of it is just to, be very much honest and introduce BI, because it is interesting, as we can hear, as what we've heard from our panelists, from Pele today, that BI is one of the most wonderful ways of creating a policy and creating initiatives. It is important for us to, highlight the importance of BI and make it easy. Use simple words and make it attractive. I would also like to, build trust in the process while creating and even building the project. In terms of introduction, I always emphasize that we need to be very clear on the objective and goals. We need to emphasize on the clients and stakeholders' needs. What is the issues? Why are we there? And why BI? So start by telling stories and highlight the importance. Give the why. Start with the why and give relatable examples that they can understand, examples that they can really be involved, examples that they can trust, that they'll honor. Use simple language. I always try to make it easy, and at the same time, it needs to be attractive. Always prepare relatables, interesting but relatable slides. I'll try to incorporate their pictures. I'll try to make the slides quite interesting, and always, involve some sort of empathy and feelings and emotions, even in delivering some of the presentations. And I like to focus on trust, because there's a research by Google called Project Aristotle, where they try to see what is the most important aspect in an organization, and how to make things work, how to make create a good cooperation among each other. And one of it is what they see is the issue of trust, and what they call as psychological barrier. So always I'll try to improve on that sense, to build the trust by being a bit vulnerable, by opening up, and by try to eliminate the psychological barrier. I would also like to give Dan Ariely's rationality examples, but I don't think we have the time. And I would also like to remind people here that sometimes we don't really believe that we can be nudged, because we think we are very, as we can see, we are most of us can be nudged, because although we are smart, we are facing thousands of choices daily. We live in an extraordinarily complicated stimulus environment. So hence why there's always shortcuts in our thinking. So that's the reason why there's heuristic and biases. That's the reason why sometimes we are being a bit irrational. So for today's session, I'll be sharing about one of our project, which is Cashless at Tioman, Cashless Society at Tioman. This is basically Tioman. Tioman is a beautiful place. And I'll try to incorporate the place in my slides. I want them to focus to have this some sort of relatability, some sort of emotional connection in the presentation. So I put a picture of Tioman. Tioman is a wonderful place. It's a beautiful place, but they only have one bank, and there are like 300,000 tourists every year. So there's an issue of payment. So we would like Tioman to be a cashless society. We want them to start doing cashless. So the project is basically to encourage the use of cashless payment in Tioman by using behavioral insight. The objective is, of course, to introduce BI, to improve competency, to intervene. And the project, what we did for the project, there's a review process where what we did is we do focus group discussion with pengusaha and peniaga, which is the business owner and entrepreneurs, and even government agencies, to understand to understand their understanding of cashless, to know why they are still not using it, and etc. Basically, to see and to understand the behavioral gap. This is the session with the entrepreneurs and business owners, ranging from cool dudes with long hair. All these are island people. They're very open. They're very they give full cooperations. And the issues that we find from the focus group discussion is, of course, the issue of infrastructure. One bank with one ATM in Tioman. There's internet connectivity issues. They don't really understand about cashless. Some are worried that their money will go, the balance will be, there's going to be problem in their balance account. There'll be issues of losing money in the process. They still don't really know or aware of cashless. And there's issue of bureaucracy for them to apply for some of the devices that they need to go to the bank, which is not in Tioman. They have to go to and to apply. There's process. There's forms to be filled, and etc. But they mostly are very interested in cashless. They do want some changes, and at the same time, we also do focus group discussion with government agencies. And with the government agencies, the issues are quite the same. Awareness, some of them are still a bit scared or a bit intimidated by cashless. There's issue of infrastructure. There's also issue of blackout. There's in Tioman. And there's status quo bias. Basically, they want things to remain the same. They don't really want it to change. They are hoping that, just maintain what it is. But they are very helpful. And they are even helping us in creating the content. One of our methods of intervention is to build some content. And this is a bit of the data. Numbers are not so bad. 71% of the business owners there are using cashless, but there are still 29% that they are not using them. And they are using QR code, if you're familiar with QR code, and there's issue in terms of QR code because internet connectivity there are quite bad. Not for the citizen there, not for the people in Tioman, but for the tourists, because the connection of our communication as what we call mobile data from our mobile data is a bit bad from Maxis or Celcom or even U Mobile. There's issue in terms of getting connectivity. So that's another reason why issue is not just about the owner having cashless, but also the hardship in utilizing or in using cashless payment. So our suggestion is to make it easy. One of our suggestion is to make this the process easy. What we do is we provide cashless device, what we know as card terminal device, as the internet connection is still quite bad. So we want the bank, the BSN, the only bank in Tioman, to provide the device to all the business owners so that it will be easy for them to accept cashless payment. We involve all the stakeholders, bank, or even the internet provider, and there will be a program and it will be launched this 23rd of May, where Bank Simpanan Nasional will be giving all the device to all the business owner. There will be no applications. Everyone will get it, and basically we make it easy to the entrepreneurs and business owners in Tioman. So everyone later will be able to accept cashless payment. We also make attractive and social content. We develop videos and content that are interesting and easy to understand. We show that cashless payment is not intimidating. It's easy. We involve the people in Tioman. We use their language and slang because basically in Tioman, the language or even the slang is a bit different. Tioman actually means burung tiong saya. Tio stands for burung tiong. Man is saya in Tioman. So they have their own language, their own slang. For your information, some of the words are not being used in Terengganu or even in Johor. So it's fairly new, and we use all the words in the posters, in the videos.
Okay.
We even make the content relatable. We created videos showing how people operate the devices and how to use QR code using local entrepreneurs, business owners. This is an example of the videos where we can see we use one of the hawkers there to hold the card to we make payment, and we show that it is not intimidating. Even someone like Pak Haji here can use cashless payment. So for the future, this is basically I'm sharing what MPC is doing. They have the Prime framework. Prime framework is quite similar to the basic framework that has been shared by Mr. Pele just now. And this is something that this is a framework that will really help all the government agencies. It will make it easy. And there's also this guideline where all the information and all the it is in the handbook, is in the guideline, and will be provided by MPC. I think that's it because of the time limit. I realized that this is more than 15 minutes already. So this is a simple sharing. Hopefully, there's question later. Thank you.
Actually, it's good timing because we have only 9 minutes left. And we have three questions, one for each one of you. So Jasper and Angeline Ho, so please stay put, hang on. One question to Susan and also one to Camilla. But I begin with a question to Shahidi first because you were mentioning about behavioral data. I would want to ask the same question to Pele and also Faisal Naru just now, but time did not meet me. When you talk about behavioral data, because now we are in the era of abundance of big data, so we can do our profiling. So, but since behavioral insights is probably within the realm of social sciences, so do you see that this big data is a boon or bane to promoting nudge and even behavioral insight? And it's very rare, even in Malaysia. I'm not so sure about Australia. We'll ask our friends afterwards whether the government are really into big data in understanding, and perhaps we can. There's a very bad word to use, manipulate the data in order for us to understand our clients better. Shahidi, what's your take on this?
Of course, there's boom or bane. It depends on us. It depends on our usage of it. But I believe that we need to be ethical, just like what Pele shared just now. It's important for us to be ethical, to use the data properly. And what we do or what we did, we basically collect all this data. We have web scraping tools, we have sentiment analysis, we even have AI to understand all this hate speech online. So we basically understand behavior in terms of internet usage. And the hate speech was taken from Twitter. So we kind of understand Twitter's user hate speech level in Malaysia. For me, in my opinion, we don't really fully utilize big data yet. In terms of behavioral insight, we can have simple survey, or we can even understand, behavior from online behavior in a way, and there are a lot of methods that we can try to gauge, to collect, and to understand data. But for the time being, to answer your question, not really, but hopefully there's a there's a room, or there's a possibility or opportunities for it to be considered. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, question from Angeline Ho to Camilla. Has the department worked on issues on political reforms? How can behavioral insights be utilized? Political reforms.
For political reforms relating to the operation of politics and democratic systems, or policy reforms in general?
Well, she did not describe. I think it's up to you to decipher Maybe.
Okay. Well, I think I've spoken about policy reforms. In terms of political reforms, that's an interesting and difficult question. I suppose one of the things that people often talk about in politics, and I did spend a little bit of time in the Senate, as you said, Mr. Saeed, in your introduction. Something people do talk about is truth in political advertising and making sure that people receive clear and honest communications through political campaigns. I think that there is a role probably for looking at how we set up our electoral institutions so that you can have a free and fair debate, but you're also making sure that there is clear information to people about what the policy proposals are on the table in an election campaign. I suppose there's a good example coming up where we're looking to have a referendum to change our constitution this year. And one of the current debates is how do we set up a fair contest between the yes campaign for this change to our constitution and the no campaign. And Behavioural Insights, I think, could play a role there to make sure if we're putting out, for example, pamphlets that are making the case for the yes and the no, we should be making sure that all of that information is not just truthful and factual, but also is clearly communicated in a way that is balanced.
Yeah, we have two questions in a row. Both, yeah. Shahidi, you raised your hand just now.
Yeah, may I?
Yes,
Because
please.
if we are to be a bit controversial, or if we are to, have you guys heard of Cambridge Analytica and how they misuse all the data? That is some of the ways that companies like that with all the data can manipulate behavior. And I think it's important for not just the political, not just in terms of the political parties or the authorities, but also for the users to understand that you can be manipulated if you are not careful. And this is not some decision making in terms of politics. It's not something that should be left on being heuristic, on bias. It should be something that you consider properly. So do keep that in mind.
Yeah. In fact, actually, Malaysia subscribed to Cambridge Analytica prior to GE14.
Yeah. Sadly, yeah.
It all boils down to the polemic, the discussion in the earlier during the keynote address whether BI is in the realm of marketing, social science, or even in political propaganda. But maybe we have to discuss that in our subsequent conference. Two questions in a row to Susan relates to your presentation earlier. The first question is from Jasper. Susan, did you investigate whether some subjects gambled more after seeing their overall loss to catch up with what's already lost? My question relates to whether there were some heterogeneous effects from your gambling intervention. And more or less the same question from Suraya asking to you, Susan. In relation to the online gambling example, can the online gambling companies be forced to show the kind of graphs you had shown earlier? That's from Suraya Sulaiman. Two questions to you, Susan.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Jasper, very good question. What we did find was that while people who were seeing the activity statements bet less in dollar value, they still bet the same number of times. So it wasn't stopping them gambling at all. It was only stopping the amount that they gambled. It was helping them make that choice. And sorry, what was the second question again?
Question is from Suraya. In relation to the online gambling example, can the online gambling companies be forced to show the kind of that you have shown earlier?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And look, we're still having those discussions now. So I can't say yes at the moment. I can't force them, but we are working with them. And it is early indications with them as we're testing it, as it rolls out in the field, is that it's in their interest to to not have problem gambling. Of course, they don't want to share with us how much they're making, but they can still share with us the amount people are gambling in a de-identified way. So we're looking for a small sample, and we will find a way to make that work. But you're absolutely right; it is challenging getting private, that information out of a private company when it's really related very closely to their profits. But we have a common goal. To give people choice and to not stop people gambling, but to stop them to stop the harm from gambling. So we're working from that common ground. We're making progress, but I'll let you know the real answer to that question in a few months.
Okay, so we need to invite you again then, or maybe you can share your answers in your social media platform so that we'll follow you afterwards. One last question for one last minute. Simple question from Kuldeep Singh: how can game theory complement BI? Any takers? Up for grabs. Game theory in
It
BI.
just so happens that my honours thesis was on this. Actually, I would say that it goes the other way. Behavioural Insights helps game theory enormously because game theorists, bless them, they will spend a lot of time thinking in theory how people should behave and setting out equilibriums for where a game should end up. And then you run it in a behavioral economics lab, and half the time it won't happen. Sometimes it does. Sometimes the theory actually does play out. Other times it really doesn't. And so I think that if you're somebody who's interested in game theory, understanding behavioural insights will make sure that the theories that you're using have a solid evidence base behind them.
Right. So that's all the time that we have for the conference. I'm so sorry. We have many more questions coming in, but time is up. Just a small note from Al-Amin. I think Encik Al-Amin is from, Mr. Al-Amin is from MPC to Camilla in the options to be considered by regulators. There are regulatory and non-regulatory approach. There's no question mark, so I suppose that's just a simple statement. It's not a question to Camilla. Nevertheless, this has been a very insightful discussion indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the end of our conference. I'd like to take a moment to express our appreciation to all our speakers who have enriched us with their understanding and experiences. I would like to thank Ms. Camilla Chivas, Ms. Susan Calvert, Mr. Muhammad Shahidi Ismail for sharing your insights into using BI in enhancing existing policies and regulations. It has been truly insightful and a lot to learn and also a lot to be experimented once we go back to our office. Your expertise in designing policies and integrate BI has been truly valuable. I would like to express our appreciation also to MPC for having me and for organizing such a productive conference for all of us today. And last but not least, many thanks to all the participants who have been with us in more than 3 hours. And we look forward to seeing you in the next conference. To all my Muslim friends, I would like to take this opportunity to wish you all Ramadan Kareem. And with that, we end the conference. Assalamualaikum and have a productive days ahead. Syed Munawar signing off.
Thank you very much.